everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. We're super to be here, and we're glad you're joining us for another episode. As we always say, a new day, a new adventure, and a new chance to explore the world with us.
Oh, finally. We get to dive into the world of Laos and Liberia. Two countries that might seem worlds apart, but we're here to break it down for you. So, buckle up, folks, and let's get started.
I'm so to share our adventures with you all. Between the last episode and this one, we had a pretty wild time. I managed to get my hair caught in a fan while trying to do a funny dance on stage. It was a real mirror moment.
Oh, Nira, you're such a drama queen. I, on the other hand, had a much more exciting experience. I spilled coffee all over my shirt while trying to do a live stream. Whoops.
Oh, Leah, you're such a clumsy comedian. But, in all seriousness, we're here to talk about Laos and Liberia. And we're going to give you the lowdown on what to expect. So, let's get started.
That's right. With today's podcast, we're going to take you on a journey through the differences between these two countries. From culture to cuisine, we'll cover it all. So, whether you're visiting, living, or even marrying someone from one of these countries, we've got you covered.
And don't worry, folks, we're not just going to give you a superficial overview. No, we're going to dive deep into the nitty-gritty details, so you can make an informed decision. After all, as they say, knowledge is power, and a good cup of coffee is even better.
That's right, Mira. And speaking of good coffee, we're brought to you by the wonderful folks at Jetoff AI, who are helping us power our podcast and bring you the best content possible. So, thank you, Jetoff. Hey, for your support.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, so you can stay up to date with all our latest episodes. We promise you, it'll be worth it.
And if you're feeling generous, you can always support us on Patreon. We appreciate all the love and support we get from our amazing community.
All right. Let's get back to the topic at hand. Laos and Liberia. Here we come. So, Leah, tell us, what do you know about these two countries?
Well, Mira, Laos is a country located in Southeast Asia, and it's known for its stunning natural beauty, rich culture, and delicious cuisine. And Liberia, on the other hand, is a country located in West Africa, and it's known for its beautiful beaches, vibrant culture, and friendly people.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners are eager to learn more. So, let's dive into the differences between these two countries. Where do we start? Leo?
Well, Mira, let's start with something fun. Did you know that Laos has a unique tradition of offering Buddha images to the river? It's a beautiful way to show respect and gratitude to the gods.
Ooh, that's so interesting. And I didn't know that about Laos. But what about Liberia? What's unique about that country?
Well, Mira, Liberia has a rich history of music and dance. In fact, the country is home to the famous Liberian drum and dance tradition, which is a UNESCO recognized cultural heritage.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I can see why you'd be about that. Leo, you love music and dance, don't you?
Who doesn't? Mira? But seriously, folks, we're just getting started. We'll be sharing more about the culture, history, and daily life in both Laos and Liberia. So, stay tuned, and let's keep the conversation going.
That's right. And don't forget to share your thoughts and comments with us on social media using the hashtag Laos and Liberia. We love hearing from our listeners and engaging with our community.
And if you're feeling adventurous, you can even share your own stories and experiences with us. We'd love to hear about your travels and adventures in Laos and Liberia.
All right, folks, that's all for now. But before we go, let's recap what we discussed so far. We've talked about Laos and Liberia. and we've given you a brief overview of what to expect. We've also mentioned that we'll be sharing more about the culture, history, and daily life in both countries.
And don't forget, folks, we're brought to you by the wonderful folks at AI, who are helping us power our podcast and bring you the best content possible.
So stay tuned, folks, and get ready for an adventure. We'll be back with more exciting content soon. Until then, take care, and remember Laos in Liberia. Here we come!
That's right, Mira! And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, so you can stay up to date with all our latest episodes. See you next time, folks.
I'm sure our listeners are curious about the safety and crime rates in Laos and Liberia. Let's dive right in. From what I've researched, Laos seems to have a relatively low crime rate compared to other countries in Southeast Asia.
That's right. Mira, Laos is known for its laid-back atmosphere and friendly locals. However, as with any country, there are some areas to be aware of. Petty theft and scams can be a problem in tourist areas like Luang Prabang and Vientiane.
Huh? I've heard those can be quite clever. But what about Liberia? I've read that it has a higher crime rate compared to Laos. What's the situation like there?
Liberia has a more complex situation. Mira, the country has a history of conflict and instability, which has led to higher crime rates. However, the government is working to improve security and reduce crime.
That's good to hear. Leo, but what about the impact of colonialism on the crime rates in both countries? I've read that colonialism can have a lasting effect on a country's crime rates.
That's a great point. Mira, colonialism can indeed have a lasting impact on a country's crime rates. In both Laos and Liberia, the legacy of colonialism has contributed to the country's current crime situation. However, it's also worth noting that both countries have made significant progress in addressing these issues.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever experienced any safety concerns while traveling in Laos or Liberia?
Well, Mira, I did have a close call in Liberia once. I was driving through a busy market in Monrovia, and suddenly, a group of young men started chasing me. I was a wealthy foreigner. Luckily, I managed to escape without any harm.
Whoa, that sounds intense. I'm glad you're safe, Leo, but I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the safety tips for traveling in both countries.
Absolutely. Mira, when traveling in Laos, it's essential to be aware of your surroundings, especially in crowded areas like markets and bus stations. In Liberia, it's crucial to be cautious when walking alone at night and to avoid displaying signs of wealth.
Great tips. Leo, and what about the role of tourism in both countries? I read that tourism can have a positive impact on a country's crime rates.
That's right. Mira, tourism can indeed have a positive impact on a country's crime rates. In both Laos and Liberia, tourism has created new economic opportunities and helped to reduce poverty, which can contribute to lower crime rates.
I'm sure our listeners would agree that tourism can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can bring in much-needed revenue. But, on the other hand, it can also lead to over-tourism and strain on local resources.
Exactly. Mira. And that's why it's essential to approach tourism in a responsible and sustainable way. By supporting local communities and respecting local customs, we can help to minimize the negative impacts of tourism.
I'm curious. Leo, what do you think is the biggest misconception about safety and crime rates in Laos and Liberia?
That's a great question. Mira, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that both countries are extremely dangerous. While it's true that there are some safety concerns, both Laos and Liberia have made significant progress in addressing these issues.
I'm sure our listeners would appreciate a more nuanced understanding of the situation. And what about the impact of social media on crime rates in both countries? I've read that social media can have a significant impact on crime rates.
That's a great point. Mira, social media can indeed have a significant impact on crime rates in both Laos and Liberia. In both countries, social media has been used to spread awareness about safety and crime issues, as well as to mobilize communities to take action against crime.
I'm curious. Leo, what do you think is the most effective way to address crime rates in both countries?
That's a tough question. Mira, I think one of the most effective ways to address crime rates is through community-led initiatives. By empowering local communities to take ownership of safety and crime issues, we can create a more sustainable and effective approach to addressing these issues.
I'm sure our listeners would agree that community-led initiatives are a great way to address crime rates. And what about the role of technology in both countries? I've read that technology can have a significant impact on crime rates.
That's a great point. Mira, technology can indeed have a significant impact on crime rates in both Laos and Liberia. In both countries, technology has been used to improve security and reduce crime through initiatives such as surveillance systems and mobile apps.
I'm sure our listeners would appreciate a more detailed understanding of the role of technology in both countries. And what about the cultural factors that contribute to crime rates in both countries?
That's a great question. Mira, in both Laos and Liberia, cultural factors such as poverty, unemployment, and social inequality can contribute to crime rates. However, both countries are also taking steps to address these issues and promote social cohesion.
I'm curious. Leah, what do you think is the most pressing issue facing both countries in terms of safety and crime rates?
That's a tough question. Mira, I think one of the most pressing issues facing both countries is the need for more effective policing and law enforcement. Both Laos and Liberia need to improve their policing capabilities to effectively address crime and keep their citizens safe.
I'm sure our listeners would agree that effective policing is essential for addressing crime rates. And what about the role of international cooperation in both countries? I've read that international cooperation can have a significant impact on crime rates.
That's a great point. Mira, international cooperation can indeed have a significant impact on crime rates in both Laos and Liberia. Both countries are working with international partners to address crime and improve security.
I'm sure our listeners would appreciate a more detailed understanding of the role of international cooperation in both countries. And what about the impact of climate change on crime rates in both countries?
That's a great question. Mira, climate change can indeed have a significant impact on crime rates in both Laos and Liberia. Climate change can lead to increased poverty, displacement, and social inequality, which can contribute to higher crime rates.
I'm curious. Leo, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing both countries in terms of addressing crime rates?
That's a tough question. Mira, I think one of the biggest challenges facing both countries is the need to balance security with human rights. Both Laos and Liberia need to ensure that their efforts to address crime do not compromise the rights of their citizens.
I'm sure our listeners would agree that balancing security with human rights is essential. And so to dive into this topic with you, Leo, let's talk about Laos and Liberia. Two countries that might not be on everyone's radar, but are definitely worth exploring. Political stability and social harmony are crucial for any expat living in these countries, and I'm curious to see how they compare.
That's a great point. Mira, both Laos and Liberia have unique histories and cultural contexts that shape their governance and community relations. Let's start with Laos. According to our research, Laos has a relatively stable government, with a socialist-oriented market economy. But, as you know, stability doesn't always mean happiness, and there are still concerns about freedom of speech and assembly.
Yes. And that's where social harmony comes in. Laos is known for its laid-back attitude and strong community ties. People are generally friendly and welcoming to foreigners, and the country has a rich cultural heritage. I've heard that the night market in Vientiane is a must-visit, with its vibrant stalls and delicious street food.
I've had the chance to experience it myself, and I agree. The night market is a great place to connect with locals and try some of the local specialties. But let's not forget about Liberia. As we all know, Liberia has a complex history, with a mix of African and American influences. The country has made significant progress in recent years, but there are still challenges related to governance and infrastructure.
That's so true. Leo, and I think it's interesting to note that both countries have a strong sense of community and social responsibility. In Laos, you'll often see people coming together to help each other out, whether it's through community projects or simply lending a hand. In Liberia, there's a similar sense of camaraderie, with a strong emphasis on family and social ties.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons why both countries are so appealing to expats who value community and cultural immersion. But let's not get too carried away with the positives. As we all know, there are also challenges and potential pitfalls to consider. For example, in Laos, there can be issues with corruption and bureaucracy, which can make it difficult for foreigners to navigate the system.
Yes. And that's where Jet Off AI comes in. I've been using their platform to research and connect with locals in both countries, and it's been incredibly helpful. They offer a range of resources and tools to help expats navigate the complexities of each country, from visa requirements to cultural etiquette.
That's a great point, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a growing expat community, with many people drawn to the laid-back atmosphere and rich cultural heritage. But, as we all know, the expat community can also be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can provide a sense of connection and community for foreigners. On the other hand, it can also create tensions and conflicts with locals.
Yes. And that's where social harmony comes in. In both Laos and Liberia, there's a strong emphasis on community and social responsibility, but also a recognition of the importance of preserving cultural identity and traditions. I've heard that in Laos, there are many festivals and celebrations throughout the year, which are a great way to connect with locals and experience the culture firsthand.
That's so true, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong sense of resilience and adaptability, which is essential for navigating the complexities of modern life, whether it's dealing with natural disasters or economic challenges. Both Laos and Liberia have shown an impressive ability to bounce back and adapt to changing circumstances.
Well, I'm certainly inspired by their resilience, Leo. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong sense of humor and ability to laugh at themselves. In Laos, you'd often see people making jokes about the bureaucracy and corruption, and in Liberia, there's a similar sense of humor and satire.
Yes. And that's where the phrase, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade comes in. Both countries have a way of turning challenges into opportunities. And that's something that I think we can all learn from.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Leo, thanks for joining me on this journey through Laos and Liberia. And I'm curious to hear from our listeners. If you have any thoughts or experiences to share, please let us know in the comments below.
And don't forget to check out Jet Off AI for more insights and resources on expat life in Laos and Liberia.
I'm loving the way we're diving into the economic side of things. Leo, from my research, Laos seems to have a relatively stable economy, with a growing service sector and a strong focus on agriculture.
That's right. Mira, and speaking of agriculture, have you tried any of the local street food in Laos? I mean, the night market in Vientiane is a whole different level of flavor explosion. But back to the topic at hand. I've heard that the cost of living in Laos is relatively low, especially when compared to other Southeast Asian countries.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why expats are drawn to Laos in the first place. But let's talk about the job market. I've been told that the job market in Laos is relatively limited, especially for foreigners. Do you think that's true, Leah?
Well, from what I've gathered, the job market in Laos is indeed limited, but it's not impossible to find work. I mean, with the right skills and experience, you can definitely find a job in sectors like tourism, education, or IT. But I do agree that it can be tough for foreigners to break into the job market.
That's a good point, Leah. And I think it's worth noting that the cost of living in Laos is not just low, but also very affordable. I mean, you can get a decent apartment in Vientiane for under $200 a month, and a meal at a local restaurant can cost as little as $3.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think it's worth mentioning that the cost of living in Laos is also influenced by the country's relatively low cost of transportation. I mean, a taxi ride in Vientiane can cost as little as $2, and a bus ticket from Vientiane to Luang Prabang can cost as little as $10.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons why Laos is such a popular destination for digital nomads and remote workers. I mean, the cost of living is so low that you can easily afford to live comfortably while working remotely.
That's a great point, Mira. And I think it's worth noting that the cost of living in Laos is also influenced by the country's relatively high tax rates. I mean, income tax in Laos can range from 10% to 25%, depending on your income level.
Oh, yes, I've heard that. But from what I understand, the tax rates in Laos are actually relatively low compared to other countries in the region. And I think it's worth noting that the tax rates in Laos are also influenced by the country's relatively low cost of living.
That's right, Mira. And I think it's worth mentioning that the tax rates in Laos are also influenced by the country's relatively high poverty rates. I mean, despite the country's growing economy, poverty remains a major issue in Laos.
Yes, that's true. And I think it's worth noting that the poverty rates in Laos are also influenced by the country's relatively low economic growth rates. I mean, while the economy has been growing steadily, it's still relatively slow compared to other countries in the region.
That's a good point, Mira. And I think it's worth mentioning that the poverty rates in Laos are also influenced by the country's relatively high levels of inequality. I mean, despite the country's growing economy, income inequality remains a major issue.
Yes, I've heard that. And I think it's worth noting that the poverty rates in Laos are also influenced by the country's relatively high levels of corruption. I mean, corruption is a major issue in Laos, and it can have a significant impact on the economy and the cost of living.
That's a good point, Mira. And I think it's worth mentioning that the poverty rates in Laos are also influenced by the country's relatively high levels of inflation. I mean, inflation is a major issue in Laos, and it can have a significant impact on the cost of living.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about Liberia. I've heard that the economy in Liberia is still recovering from the civil war, but it's making progress.
Yes, that's true. And I think it's worth noting that the cost of living in Liberia is relatively high compared to other West African countries. I mean, a meal at a local restaurant can cost as much as $10, and a taxi ride in Monrovia can cost as much as $20.
Well, that's a big difference from Laos, isn't it? I mean, in Laos, we were talking about meals costing as little as $3.
That's right, Mira. And I think it's worth mentioning that the cost of living in Liberia is also influenced by the country's relatively high levels of unemployment. I mean, unemployment is a major issue in Liberia, and it can have a significant impact on the economy and the cost of living.
Yes, I've heard that. And I think it's worth noting that the unemployment rates in Liberia are also influenced by the country's relatively low levels of economic growth. I mean, while the economy has been growing steadily, it's still relatively slow compared to other countries in the region.
That's a good point, Mira. And I think it's worth mentioning that the unemployment rates in Liberia are also influenced by the country's relatively high levels of corruption. I mean, corruption is a major issue in Liberia, and it can have a significant impact on the economy and the cost of living.
Okay, let's wrap up this section by talking about some practical tips for expats living in Laos and Liberia. I've heard that it's possible to live comfortably in Laos for under $1 a month, but it would require some careful budgeting and planning.
That's right, Mira. And I think it's worth noting that the cost of living in Laos is also influenced by the country's relatively low levels of bureaucracy. I mean, getting a visa or registering a business in Laos can be relatively straightforward compared to other countries in the region.
Yes, I've heard that. And I think it's worth mentioning that the cost of living in Liberia is also influenced by the country's relatively high levels of bureaucracy. I mean, getting a visa or registering a business in Liberia can be relatively complex and time-consuming.
That's a good point, Mira. And I think it's worth noting that the cost of living in both Laos and Liberia is also influenced by the country's relatively high levels of inflation. I mean, inflation is a major issue in both countries, and it can have a significant impact on the cost of living.
Okay, let's summarize what we've discussed so far. From our research, it seems that Laos has a relatively stable economy and a low cost of living, but the job market is limited for foreigners. Liberia, on the other hand, has a recovering economy and I'm curious. Leo, have you ever thought about what it's like to live in a country where the concept of personal space is a bit flexible? Like Laos, where you can find a place to stay in a bustling town like Luang Prabang. But it's not uncommon for families to live in houses with no walls separating their living areas from the street.
Well, I think that's an interesting point, Mira. But in all seriousness, Laos has a lot to offer when it comes to accommodation options. From traditional wooden houses to modern apartments, there's something for every budget and style.
Exactly. And speaking of budgets, have you heard about the affordable rent prices in Luang Prabang? I'm talking about a one-bedroom apartment for under $200 a month. It's like they're giving you a free vacation. Leo!
Well, I think you're selling it a bit short. Yeah, but seriously, the cost of living in Laos is relatively low compared to other Southeast Asian countries. And if you're looking for a more luxurious experience, you can find high-end resorts and hotels in places like Vientiane and Luang Prabang.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the concept of homestays in Laos. Have you ever stayed in a homestay? Leo? It's like living with a local family, but without the awkwardness of actually living with them.
Well, I think it's a great way to experience the local culture. Mira. And yes, I have stayed in a homestay before, and it was a fantastic experience. You get to live with a local family and learn about their customs and traditions.
That sounds amazing. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. So, what was it like living with a local family in Laos? Did you learn any new skills or traditions?
Well, I learned how to make some traditional Lao dishes, like larbi and tam makhan. And I also learned how to play a few traditional Lao instruments, like the K, HAN.
Wow, that's impressive. Leo, I'm sure our listeners are jealous. But seriously, it's great that you're promoting cultural exchange and understanding. And speaking of cultural exchange, have you ever noticed how different the concept of home is in Laos compared to Liberia?
Yes. I think that's a great point. Mira, in Laos, the concept of home is often tied to the idea of family and community, whereas in Liberia, it's more about individual ownership and property rights.
Exactly. And I think that's something that's really interesting to explore. Leo, how's the concept of home shape our experiences and perceptions of a place? And how do different cultures approach the idea of ownership and property rights?
Well, I think it's a great topic for discussion, Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. So, let's dive in and explore the differences between Laos and Liberia when it comes to accommodation options and quality.
Sounds like a plan. Leo, and let's not forget to mention the beautiful scenery and landscapes of both countries. I mean, have you seen the stunning natural beauty of Laos? It's like a tropical paradise.
Well, I think you're selling it a bit short, Mira. But seriously, both Laos and Liberia have their own unique natural beauty and attractions. From the limestone karstas of Luang Prabang to the beautiful beaches of Liberia, there's something for every nature lover.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the concept of ecotourism in both countries. Have you ever stayed in an eco-lodge or participated in an ecotourism activity? Leo?
Yes. I think it's a great way to experience the natural beauty of a place while also supporting local communities and conservation efforts. And I have stayed in an eco-lodge in Laos before, and it was a fantastic experience.
That sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. So, what was it like staying in an eco-lodge in Laos? Did you learn any new skills or participate in any ecotourism activities?
Well, I learned how to make some traditional Lao crafts, like weaving and basket making. And I also participated in a few ecotourism activities, like tree planting and wildlife conservation.
Well, that's impressive. Leo, I'm sure our listeners are jealous. But seriously, it's great that you're promoting ecotourism and sustainable tourism practices. And speaking of sustainable tourism, have you ever noticed how different the concept of tourism is in Laos compared to Liberia?
Ah, yes. I think that's a great point. Mira, in Laos, tourism is often seen as a way to support local communities and preserve cultural heritage. Whereas in Liberia, it's more about economic development and job creation.
Exactly. And I think that's something that's really interesting to explore. Leo, how does the concept of tourism shape our experiences and perceptions of a place? And how do different cultures approach the idea of tourism and economic development?
Well, I think it's a great topic for discussion, Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. So, let's dive in and explore the differences between Laos and Liberia when it comes to accommodation options and quality.
Sounds like a plan. Leo, and let's not forget to mention the unique accommodation options in both countries. I mean, have you seen the traditional wooden houses in Laos? They're like something out of a fairy tale.
Well, I think you're selling it a bit short, Mira. But seriously, both Laos and Liberia have their own unique accommodation options. From traditional wooden houses to modern apartments, there's something for every budget and style.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the concept of hostels in both countries. Have you ever stayed in a hostel? Leo? It's like living with a bunch of strangers, but without the awkwardness of actually living with them.
Well, I think it's a great way to meet new people and experience the local culture. Mira, and yes, I have stayed in a hostel before, and it was a fantastic experience. You get to live with a bunch of strangers and learn about their customs and traditions.
Well, that sounds like a wild experience. Leo! But seriously, hostels can be a great way to experience the local culture and meet new people. And speaking of meeting new people, to dive into the visa process for Laos and Liberia, shall we? I'm curious to know how easy or challenging it is for expats to navigate the bureaucratic journey.
Ah, great topic. I've had my fair share of visa woes in various countries, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about the experiences of others. Laos, for instance, has a relatively straightforward visa process, especially for tourists. You can get a visa on arrival, and it's usually a smooth process.
That's good to know. I've heard that Laos is one of the more relaxed countries when it comes to visa requirements. But what about Liberia? I've read that their visa process can be a bit more complicated.
Ah, yes. Liberia's visa process can be a bit more involved, especially for non-African citizens. But, you know, it's not all bad news. With a bit of preparation and patience, you can navigate the process and get your visa sorted.
Patience. Leo? You're not exactly known for being patient, are you?
Well, maybe not. But I do try. Seriously. Though, it's essential to research and understand the visa requirements for both countries before making the move.
Absolutely. I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's crucial to be informed about the visa process before embarking on an international adventure. So, let's talk more about the visa requirements for Laos. What are the common types of visas available? And how do they differ?
Ah, great question. In Laos, you can get a tourist visa, a business visa, or an investor visa, among others. The tourist visa is usually the most straightforward, and it's valid for 30 days. However, if you plan to stay longer, you'll need to apply for a longer-term visa.
That makes sense. And what about Liberia? What types of visas are available? And what are the requirements for each?
Well, in Liberia, you can get a tourist visa, a business visa, or a work visa. The requirements vary depending on the type of visa. But generally, you'll need to provide proof of citizenship, a valid passport, and a completed visa application form.
I see. So it sounds like both countries have relatively similar visa requirements, but with some variations. What about the process of applying for a visa? Is it easy to do online? Or do you need to visit an embassy or consulate in person?
Ah, great question. In Laos, you can apply for a visa online, but it's often recommended to apply in person at the embassy or consulate to ensure a smooth process. In Liberia, however, it's usually best to apply in person, as the online application process can be a bit more complicated.
I'm sure our listeners would appreciate the practical advice. Leo, so let's talk more about the actual process of getting a visa for both countries. What are some common pitfalls or mistakes that expats should avoid?
Great question. One common mistake is not double-checking the visa requirements or not providing the necessary documents. Another mistake is not applying in time, as the visa process can take several weeks or even months.
That's so true. It's essential to plan ahead and be prepared for the visa process. And what about the cost of obtaining a visa? Is it expensive? Or are there any affordable options available?
Great question. The cost of obtaining a visa can vary depending on the type of visa in the country. However, in both Laos and Liberia, you can often find affordable options, such as visa on arrival or online applications.
I'm sure our listeners would appreciate the cost breakdown. So where's the key takeaways for both countries? What are the most important things to keep in mind when applying for a visa in Laos and Liberia?
Great question. In Laos, the most important thing to keep in mind is to research and understand the visa requirements, apply in person if possible, and provide all necessary documents. In Liberia, it's essential to apply in person, provide all necessary documents, and plan ahead to avoid any delays.
I think that's a great summary. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's essential to be informed and prepared when navigating the visa process in both countries.
Absolutely. And don't forget to check the official government websites for the most up-to-date information on visa requirements and application processes.
Excellent advice. Leo! And finally, I'm curious to know, have you or any of our listeners had any particularly memorable or challenging experiences with the visa process in Laos or Liberia?
Great question. Actually, I have a friend who had a bit of a nightmare with the visa process in Liberia. He ended up waiting in line for several hours, only to find out that his application was incomplete. But, it all worked out in the end.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it all worked out in the end. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate the cautionary tale. Well, that's all for this criterion. Thanks for sharing your insights. Leo!
Thanks, Mira. And don't forget to tune in next time for more exciting discussions on expat life.
Dive into the healthcare system in Laos. I'm sure our listeners living in this country would agree with me that access to healthcare can be a challenge, especially in rural areas.
That's an understatement. I've heard stories of healthcare professionals traveling for hours just to reach remote villages. And even then, medical supplies and equipment can be scarce.
Exactly. But what's interesting is that Laos has made significant strides in recent years to improve healthcare access. The government has implemented a program to train healthcare workers in rural areas, which has helped reduce the shortage of medical professionals.
That's great to hear. But what about the quality of care? I've heard that Laos still lags behind in terms of healthcare infrastructure and technology.
Yes. While Laos has made progress, there's still a long way to go in terms of modernizing its healthcare system. But, as I always say, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And in this case, the lemons are the challenges, and the lemonade is the resilience of the laap people.
Well, I suppose that's one way to look at it. But seriously, what about the role of traditional medicine in Laos? I've heard that it plays a significant role in the country's healthcare system.
Oh, absolutely. Traditional medicine, also known as folk medicine, is an integral part of Lao culture. Many people rely on traditional healers and herbal remedies to treat a range of ailments.
That's fascinating. I've heard that some of these traditional remedies are quite effective, but also potentially hazardous if not used properly.
Exactly. And that's why it's essential to strike a balance between traditional and modern medicine. In Laos, I've seen how traditional healers and modern healthcare professionals work together to provide comprehensive care.
That's a great example of cultural sensitivity and cooperation. Now, let's compare this to Liberia. I've heard that Liberia has a relatively well-developed healthcare system, especially in urban areas.
Yes. Liberia has made significant progress in recent years, thanks in part to international aid and investment. But, as we all know, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Liberia still faces significant challenges in terms of healthcare access and quality.
That's true. But what about the role of NGOs and international organizations in Liberia's healthcare system? I've heard that they play a significant role in providing healthcare services, especially in rural areas.
Oh, absolutely. NGOs and international organizations have been instrumental in providing healthcare services to Liberia's rural communities. But, as I always say, be careful what you wish for. In this case, we need to be careful not to over-rely on external aid and undermine the local healthcare system.
Well, that's a valid point. And speaking of valid points, what about the issue of healthcare costs in Liberia? I've heard that they can be quite high, especially for expats.
Oh, yes. Healthcare costs can be a significant burden for many people in Liberia, including expats. But, as I always say, when life gives you high healthcare costs, make a budget.
Well, I suppose that's one way to look at it. But, seriously, what about the quality of care in Liberia? I've heard that it's generally good, but with some notable exceptions.
Oh, absolutely. Liberia has made significant progress in terms of healthcare quality, but there's still room for improvement. And that's why it's essential to be informed and prepared when seeking healthcare services in Liberia.
That's a great point. And speaking of being informed, what about the role of health insurance in Liberia? I've heard that it's not very developed.
Yes. Health insurance is still a relatively new concept in Liberia, but it's gaining traction. However, as I always say, you can't have your cake and eat it too. In this case, we need to balance the need for health insurance with the need for affordable health care.
Well, that's a valid point. And speaking of valid points, what about the issue of medical tourism in Liberia? I've heard that it's becoming increasingly popular.
Oh, absolutely. Liberia is becoming a popular destination for medical tourists, especially those seeking affordable healthcare options. But, as I always say, be careful what you wish for. We need to be careful not to compromise the local healthcare system in the process.
That's a great point. And speaking of great points, what about the issue of healthcare worker shortages in Liberia? I've heard that it's a significant challenge.
Yes. Healthcare worker shortages are a major challenge in Liberia. But it's not unique to the country. Many countries face similar challenges. As I always say, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. In this case, the lemons are the shortages, and the lemonade is the resilience of Liberia's healthcare professionals.
Well, I suppose that's one way to look at it. But seriously, what about the role of technology in Liberia's healthcare system? I've heard that it's becoming increasingly important.
Oh, absolutely. Technology is playing an increasingly important role in Liberia's healthcare system, especially in terms of telemedicine and digital health. But, as I always say, you can't have your cake and eat it too. We need to balance the benefits of technology with the need for human touch in healthcare.
That's a great point. And speaking of great points, what about the issue of healthcare funding in Liberia? I've heard that it's a significant challenge.
Yes. Healthcare funding is a significant challenge in Liberia. But it's not unique to the country. Many countries face similar challenges. As I always say, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. In this case, the lemons are the funding challenges, and the lemonade is the creativity and resourcefulness of Liberia's healthcare professionals.
Well, I suppose that's one way to look at it. But seriously, what about the quality of care in Liberia? I've heard that it's generally good, but with some notable exceptions.
Oh, absolutely. Liberia has made significant progress in terms of healthcare quality, but there's still room for improvement. And that's why it's essential to be informed and prepared when seeking healthcare services in Liberia.
That's a great point. And speaking of great points, what about the issue of medical tourism in Liberia? I've heard that it's becoming increasingly popular.
Oh, absolutely. Liberia is becoming a popular destination for medical tourists, especially those seeking affordable healthcare options. But, as I always say, be careful what you wish for. We need to be careful not to compromise the local healthcare system in the process.
That's a great point. And speaking of great points, what about the issue of healthcare worker shortages in?
All right, let's dive into transportation, infrastructure, and convenience in Laos and Liberia. I've got a friend who visited Laos and was amazed by the night buses. They're like party buses on wheels.
That's hilarious. But seriously, Laos has made significant improvements in its public transportation system, with more buses and minivans connecting major cities. However, the roads can be rough, especially during the rainy season.
I bet our listeners in Laos know what I'm talking about. The muddy roads and potholes can be a real challenge. But hey, at least the scenic views make up for it. Have you ever taken a tuk-tuk ride in Laos? Leo?
Yes, I have. And it's an experience like no other. But in Liberia, I was by the lack of public transportation options. The country is working to improve its infrastructure, but it's a tough challenge.
That's true. Liberia has faced significant challenges in rebuilding its infrastructure after the Civil War. But despite these challenges, the people are resilient and resourceful. I've heard that the country has a vibrant market culture, with vendors selling everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts.
Exactly. And the markets are a great place to experience the local culture. Though when it comes to transportation, Liberia's roads are in dire need of repair. I've seen potholes the size of craters.
I can imagine. But in all seriousness, transportation infrastructure is a critical issue in both countries. In Laos, the government has invested in improving the road network, including the construction of new highways and bridges.
That's right. And in Liberia, the government is working to upgrade the country's transportation system, including the construction of new roads and the improvement of existing ones. However, it's a slow process, and the country still faces significant challenges in this area.
I bet our listeners in Liberia can relate to the struggles of traveling on rough roads. But what about the ferry system in Laos? I've heard it's a great way to see the country's scenic waterways.
Ah, yes. The ferry system in Laos is a wonderful way to experience the country's natural beauty. And in Liberia, the country's coastal location makes it an ideal place for water transportation. However, the ferry system in Liberia is still developing, and there are limited options for travelers.
That's true. But in Laos, the ferry system is a major transportation artery, connecting major cities and towns along the Mekong River. And in Liberia, the country's coastline offers a unique opportunity for water transportation, including ferry services and fishing villages.
Exactly. And speaking of transportation, I've heard that Laos has a unique system of transportation called the sun-drenched, a red truck that serves as a shared taxi.
I love it. The sun-drenched is a fun and affordable way to get around Laos. And in Liberia, the country's transportation system is still developing. Thus, there are some great options for travelers, including buses and taxis.
That's right. And in both countries, the transportation infrastructure is improving, but there's still a long way to go. But hey, at least the scenic views make up for it, right?
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners in both countries can relate to the challenges of traveling on rough roads. But what do you think is the most important factor in improving transportation infrastructure in these countries?
I think it's a combination of factors, including government investment, private sector involvement, and community engagement. But also, it's about creating a culture of safety and respect for transportation infrastructure.
I completely agree. And in Laos, the government has made significant efforts to improve transportation infrastructure, including the construction of new roads and bridges. But in Liberia, the country still faces significant challenges in this area.
That's true. But in both countries, there are opportunities for improvement, and I'm sure our listeners will have some great ideas and insights to share.
Absolutely. And speaking of ideas, if you got a better transit hack for navigating these countries, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you got a favorite transportation experience in either country, share it with us. We'd love to hear about it.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more travel tips and stories from around the world. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
And don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this episode. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.
Dive into the world of language barriers and ease of communication in Laos and Liberia. I'm curious. Leo, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of language diversity in these countries?
Well, Mira, I think what's fascinating is that Laos has 68 languages spoken across the country, while Liberia has over 20 indigenous languages. It's incredible to think about the linguistic richness in these countries.
That's amazing. What if our listeners living in Laos or Liberia could speak one of the local languages fluently? How would that change their experience?
I think it would definitely make navigating everyday life easier. Imagine being able to order food, haggle at the market, or even just have a simple conversation with a local without any language barriers.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting that both countries have a mix of indigenous and immigrant languages. In Laos, you have the dominant Lao language, but also many ethnic minority languages. In Liberia, you have the K-Bel language, but also English and other immigrant languages.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a history of colonialism, which has influenced the languages spoken today. In Laos, you had French colonial rule, while in Liberia, you had American colonial rule.
Yes. That's a great point. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think the legacy of colonialism has a significant impact on the languages spoken in these countries today?
I think it's definitely a factor, but also a complex one. On one hand, colonialism introduced new languages and languages of wider communication, like English in Liberia. On the other hand, it also led to the suppression of indigenous languages and cultures.
I see what you mean. And I think it's interesting that in both countries, there's a growing movement to promote local languages and cultures. In Laos, you have the Lao language promotion policy, while in Liberia, you have initiatives to promote K-Bel and other indigenous languages.
That's great to hear. I think it's essential to preserve and promote local languages and cultures, especially in the face of globalization and the dominance of English as a global language.
Absolutely. And I think our listeners would agree with us on this. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments. But I think it's clear that language is a powerful tool for identity, culture, and communication.
Exactly. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong oral tradition, with many stories, proverbs, and songs passed down through generations.
Yes. That's beautiful. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear some of these stories and songs. Maybe we can share some in future episodes.
That's a great idea. Mira, and I think it's essential to learn about the language and culture of the country you're visiting or living in. It's not just about learning a few phrases, but about understanding the nuances of communication and cultural norms.
I completely agree. And I think it's interesting that in both countries, there are many expats and foreigners who are learning the local languages and adapting to the cultural norms.
Yes. That's a great point. And I think it's worth noting that language is not just about communication, but also about identity and belonging.
Exactly. And I think our listeners would agree with us on this. So, let's wrap up this criterion and move on to the next one.
Sounds good to me. Mira, and I think it's essential to remember that language is a complex and multifaceted issue, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Absolutely. And I think our listeners would agree with us on this. Thanks for sharing your insights.
Thanks, Mira. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the language and culture of Laos and Liberia.
I'm fascinated by Laos' rich cultural tapestry, with over 160 ethnic groups contributing to its unique identity. Can you imagine having to navigate a whole different set of customs and traditions every few kilometers?
That's what makes Laos so fascinating. The blend of cultures is like a delicious stir-fry, with each ingredient adding its own flavor. And let's not forget the 66% of the population who are Buddhist, which influences their way of life in subtle yet profound ways.
Exactly. The Buddhist philosophy of compassion and tolerance is deeply ingrained in Laotian culture. I'm certain that our listeners living in Laos would agree with me that kindness and respect for others are essential values.
I'm curious to know what our listeners think about this. Do you think that's something that's unique to Laos or something that's found in other countries as well?
Actually, I think it's a common thread throughout Southeast Asia, where Buddhism has a strong presence. But what I find particularly interesting is how Laos has managed to preserve its cultural heritage despite being a relatively small country.
Yes. The concept of miwang or community is deeply ingrained in Laotian culture. It's all about looking out for one another and working together for the greater good. I'm reminded of the saying, "'Tis better to give than to receive," which is a common phrase in Laos.
That's beautiful. And I think it's wonderful how Laos has been able to adapt to modernization while still holding on to its traditional values. It's a delicate balance, but one that seems to be working for the country.
Indeed it is. And I think that's something that our listeners can learn from how to balance tradition and modernity in a way that's authentic and respectful. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments and we'll discuss it further.
Now, let's talk about Liberia, which has a fascinating story of cultural diversity and tolerance. The country has a history of being a melting pot of cultures, with influences from Africa, Europe, and the Americas.
That's right. And what's interesting is how Liberia has managed to preserve its cultural heritage despite being a small country with a relatively short history. The country's motto, "The love of liberty brings us together," is a testament to its commitment to unity and diversity.
I love that. And I think it's wonderful how Liberia has been able to celebrate its cultural diversity through festivals and traditions. For example, the annual Gala Night celebration brings together people from all over the country to showcase their music, dance, and art.
That sounds like a fantastic event. And I think it's great how Liberia has been able to use its cultural heritage as a way to promote unity and understanding. It's a powerful message that can be applied to any country or community.
I completely agree. And I think it's essential for countries like Liberia to continue promoting cultural diversity and tolerance, especially in a world that's becoming increasingly globalized.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that our listeners can take away from this conversation, the importance of celebrating cultural diversity and promoting tolerance in our own communities.
You know, I was about the concept of Ubuntu or humanism in African culture, and how it's all about recognizing the interdependence of all people.
Yes. That's a beautiful concept, and one that's deeply rooted in African culture. And I think it's something that can be applied to any culture, not just African ones.
Exactly. And I think it's wonderful how Liberia has been able to promote this concept through its cultural heritage. It's a powerful message that can bring people together and promote understanding.
Indeed it is. And I think that's something that our listeners can learn from the importance of recognizing the interdependence of all people and promoting cultural diversity and tolerance.
Now, let's talk about some of the challenges that Liberia has faced in terms of cultural diversity and tolerance. For example, the country has a history of tribal conflicts and violence.
Yes, that's true. But what's interesting is how Liberia has managed to recover from those conflicts and promote unity and understanding. The country's commitment to peace and reconciliation is a testament to its resilience and determination.
I love that. And I think it's wonderful how Liberia has been able to use its cultural heritage to promote peace and reconciliation. It's a powerful message that can be applied to any country or community.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that our listeners can take away from this conversation, the importance of promoting cultural diversity and tolerance, even in the face of adversity.
I'm curious to know what our listeners think about this. Do you think that's something that's unique to Liberia or something that's found in other countries as well?
I think it's a common thread throughout many countries, actually. But what's interesting is how Liberia has managed to preserve its cultural heritage, despite being a small country with a relatively short history.
That's right. And I think it's wonderful how Liberia has been able to promote cultural diversity and tolerance through its cultural heritage. It's a powerful message that can bring people together and promote understanding.
Indeed it is. And I think that's something that our listeners can learn from the importance of recognizing the interdependence of all people in promoting cultural diversity and tolerance.
Now, let's talk about some of the ways in which Laos and Liberia can learn from each other. For example, Laos has a strong tradition of community-based development, which could be applied to Liberia's post-conflict reconstruction efforts.
Ah, yes. That's a great idea. And I think it's wonderful how Laos has been able to promote community-based development through its cultural heritage. It's a powerful message that can be applied to any country or community.
I completely agree. And I think it's essential for countries like Laos and Liberia to continue promoting cultural diversity and tolerance, especially in a world that's becoming increasingly globalized.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that our listeners can take away from this conversation, the importance of celebrating cultural diversity and promoting tolerance in our own communities.
And to talk about educational opportunities and language schools in Laos and Liberia. Let's start with Laos, a country with a rich cultural heritage and a strong emphasis on education.
Ah, yes. Laos is known for its beautiful temples and vibrant markets. But did you know that it also has a relatively high literacy rate of around 70%? That's impressive, especially considering the country's economic challenges.
Exactly. And I think that's due in part to the government's efforts to increase access to education, especially in rural areas. I'm curious. Leo, have you heard about the unique educational approaches they're using in Laos?
Actually, I have. They're incorporating traditional teaching methods with modern technology, which is really innovative. And it's not just about teaching the curriculum, but also about preserving the country's cultural heritage.
That's so cool. I'm sure our listeners living in Laos would agree that preserving their cultural heritage is essential. And speaking of preservation, I've heard that Liberia is also working to preserve its cultural heritage through education.
Ah, yes. Liberia has a rich cultural heritage, too, and they're doing a great job of preserving it through education. But what I find interesting is that Liberia has a relatively low literacy rate of around 48%. What do you think is contributing to this? Mira?
That's a great question. Leo, I think it might be due to the country's history of conflict and instability, which has disrupted the education system. But I'm curious, what are some of the innovative teaching methods they're using in Liberia?
Well, they're actually using a lot of community-based approaches, which is really effective in rural areas. And they're also incorporating traditional storytelling and music into their teaching methods, which makes learning more engaging and fun.
That's fantastic. I love how they're using storytelling and music to make learning more engaging. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the language schools in both countries.
Yes. The language schools in Laos and Liberia are definitely worth talking about. In Laos, they have a lot of international schools that offer English language programs, which is great for expats and locals alike.
That's true. And in Liberia, they have a lot of private language schools that offer English language training, which is really popular among locals and expats. I'm curious. Leo, have you heard about any language schools that are specifically designed for children?
Yes. In Laos, they have a lot of language schools that cater specifically to children, and they offer a range of programs from beginner to advanced levels. And in Liberia, they have some amazing language schools that offer interactive and immersive language learning experiences for kids.
That's wonderful. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about these language schools and how they can support language acquisition. And speaking of support, I think it's worth noting that both countries have a lot of resources available to support language learners, including online language courses and language exchange programs.
Ah, yes. And they also have a lot of language tutors and mentors who are available to provide one-on-one support and guidance to language learners. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do they have any experience with language schools or language learning programs in either country?
That's a great question. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would love to share their experiences and tips with us. And speaking of tips, I have a few suggestions for language learners in both countries.
Ah, yes. Please do share. Mira, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear your suggestions. And I have a few tips of my own. Have you heard about the importance of immersion in language learning?
Yes. Immersion is key to language learning. And both countries offer plenty of opportunities for immersion. In Laos, you can immerse yourself in the local language by attending cultural festivals and events. And in Liberia, you can immerse yourself in the local language by participating in community-based language programs.
Ah, that's so true. Mira, and I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a lot of resources available to support language learners, including language exchange programs and online language courses.
Yes. And don't forget about the importance of practicing your language skills in real-life situations, whether it's ordering food at a restaurant or haggling at a market. Practicing your language skills in real-life situations is crucial to language acquisition.
Oh, that's so true. Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a lot of friendly locals who are eager to practice their English skills with foreigners.
Oh, yes. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the language schools and language learning programs in both countries. Maybe we can even get some feedback from our listeners who have experience with language schools in Laos and Liberia.
Ah, that's a great idea. Mira, I'm sure our listeners would love to share their experiences and tips with us. And speaking of tips, I have a few more suggestions for language learners in both countries.
Yes. Please do share. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear your suggestions. And I have one more thing to add if you're planning to move to either country. Be sure to research the local language and culture before you go.
Ah, that's so true. Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a lot of resources available to support language learners, including language exchange programs and online language courses.
I'm to dive into the topic of climate and seasonal conditions in Laos and Liberia. Let's start with the basics. What's the temperature like in these countries? I'm curious to know if they have distinct seasons or if it's more of a tropical climate year-round.
Ah, good question. Mira, Laos is generally warm, with temperatures ranging from 15 to 30 degrees Celsius. It's a tropical monsoon climate, with 3 distinct seasons: hot, rainy, and cool. On the other hand, Liberia is a tropical country with a dry and wet season. Temperatures are relatively consistent throughout the year, ranging from 20 to 30 degrees Celsius.
Wow, that's quite a range. I can imagine the hot season would be quite unbearable. Do people adapt to the heat by changing their daily routines, or do they just power through it?
Yes. The Laotians are quite adaptable. During the hot season, they tend to stay indoors during the hottest part of the day and take naps in the afternoon. They also wear lightweight, loose-fitting clothing to keep cool. In Liberia, people also take precautions to stay cool, but it's more about adjusting their daily activities to avoid the heat.
I can imagine that would be a challenge, especially in rural areas where access to cooling resources might be limited. How do local communities cope with the rainy season in Laos? Do they have any traditional practices or technologies to help mitigate the effects of flooding?
Yes. The Laotians have a rich tradition of dealing with the rainy season. They use a combination of traditional knowledge and modern technology to prevent flooding. For example, they use bamboo to construct homes and buildings that can withstand strong winds and heavy rainfall. They also use traditional water management systems, such as canals and dikes, to control water flow.
That's fascinating. I can see how that would be beneficial in preventing flooding. What about Liberia? Do they have any similar practices or technologies to cope with the rainy season?
Yes. The Liberians also have their own traditional practices. During the rainy season, They often use traditional farming practices, such as crop rotation and terracing, to prevent soil erosion and flooding. They also use modern technologies, such as rainwater harvesting systems, to collect and store rainwater for irrigation and other household uses.
I'm impressed by the resourcefulness of both countries. It's clear that they've developed unique solutions to adapt to their respective climates. I'm curious to know more about the impact of climate change on these countries. How are rising temperatures and changing weather patterns affecting the environment and local communities?
Yes. Climate change is a major concern for both countries. Rising temperatures are leading to more frequent and severe weather events, such as droughts, floods, and heat waves. This is having a significant impact on agriculture, water resources, and human health. In Laos, for example, the changing climate is affecting the rice crop, which is a staple food for many nations.
That's a critical issue, especially for food security. I'm sure our listeners living in these countries would agree with me that climate change is a pressing concern. What about the role of government policies and international cooperation in addressing climate change in these countries?
Yes. Government policies and international cooperation are crucial in addressing climate change. Both countries have implemented policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. For example, Laos has implemented a national climate change strategy, which includes reducing deforestation and promoting sustainable agriculture practices. Liberia has also implemented a climate change policy, which focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and promoting climate-resilient infrastructure.
That's great to hear. It's clear that both countries are taking steps to address climate change. I'm curious to know more about the role of local communities in mitigating the effects of climate change. How are they adapting to changing weather patterns and what initiatives are they implementing to reduce their carbon footprint?
Yes. Local communities are playing a crucial role in mitigating the effects of climate change. In Laos, for example, local communities are implementing traditional practices, such agroforestry and permaculture, to promote sustainable agriculture and reduce deforestation. In Liberia, local communities are implementing initiatives, such as reforestation and sustainable fishing practices, to reduce their carbon footprint and promote biodiversity.
I'm impressed by the ingenuity of local communities in addressing climate change. It's clear that they're taking a proactive approach to mitigating the effects of climate change. I'm curious to know more about the impact of climate change on local economies and livelihoods. How are changing weather patterns affecting the economy and what initiatives are being implemented to promote economic resilience?
Yes. Climate change is having a significant impact on local economies and livelihoods. In Laos, for example, changing weather patterns are affecting the tourism industry, which is a major source of revenue for the country. In Liberia, climate change is affecting the agriculture sector, which is a major source of income for many Liberians.
That's a critical issue, especially for economic development. I'm sure our listeners living in these countries would agree with me that climate change is a pressing concern. What about the role of international cooperation and aid in addressing climate change in these countries? How are governments and international organizations working together to support climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts?
Yes. International cooperation and aid are crucial in addressing climate change. Both countries are receiving support from governments and international organizations to implement climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts. For example, Laos is receiving support from the Asian Development Bank to implement climate-resilient infrastructure and promote sustainable agriculture practices. Liberia is also receiving support from the United Nations to implement climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts.
That's great to hear. It's clear that international cooperation and aid are playing a critical role in supporting climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts in these countries. I'm curious to know more about the role of individual actions in mitigating the effects of climate change. What simple actions can people take to reduce their carbon footprint and promote climate resilience?
Yes. Individual actions are crucial in mitigating the effects of climate change. Simple actions, such as reducing energy consumption, using public transport, and recycling, can make a significant difference. People can also support climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts by donating to organizations that are working to address climate change.
That's a great point. Leo! Individual actions can have a significant impact when combined with collective efforts. I'm sure our listeners living in these countries would agree with me that every small action counts. What about the role of education and awareness raising in promoting climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts? How are governments and international organizations working to educate people about climate change and its impacts?
Yes. Education and awareness raising are crucial in promoting climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts. Governments and international organizations are working to educate people about climate change and its impacts through various initiatives, such as public awareness campaigns, educational programs, and community outreach activities.
That's a great initiative. Leo, education and awareness raising are essential. I'm telling you. Leo, Laos has the most amazing street food scene. The smell of grilled meat and spices wafts through the streets, and you can't help but follow the aroma to the nearest food stall. Have you ever tried the laap? Leo?
Yes. Laap. I've had it a few times. And it's indeed a flavor explosion. But, Mira, you know what's even more fascinating? The way the Laotians combine fermented fish sauce with fresh herbs and chilies to create this incredibly complex flavor profile. It's like a symphony of tastes.
Oh, Leo, you're such a foodie. I love how you describe it. But the fermentation process in the ocean cuisine is quite impressive. They use a type of fish sauce called poured oat that's made from fermented fish and salt. It's an acquired taste, but once you get used to it, it's a game changer.
Acquired taste. Indeed. But, Mira, have you tried the Liberian dish, jollof rice? It's a staple in West Africa, and it's essentially a one-pot meal made with rice, tomatoes, onions, and spices. The flavors are incredible, and it's a great example of how Liberian cuisine blends African and Caribbean influences.
Oh, jollof rice? I've heard of it. My friend from Ghana told me about it, and I've been wanting to try it ever since. You know, Leo, I think what's fascinating about both Laos cuisine is the way they use local ingredients to create unique flavor profiles. In Laos, they use ingredients like galangal, lemongrass, and chilies to add depth to their dishes. In Liberia, they use ingredients like palm oil, peanuts, and spices to create their signature flavors.
Exactly. Mira, and it's not just about the ingredients. It's also about the cooking techniques. In Laos, they use a lot of grilling and steaming to preserve the freshness of the ingredients. In Liberia, they use a lot of frying and roasting to bring out the flavors of the ingredients. It's amazing to see how different cooking techniques can result in such unique flavor profiles.
I know, right? And speaking of unique flavor profiles, have you tried the Liberian dish, fufu? It's made from boiled and pounded cassava or yams, and it's usually served with a soup or stew.
Yes, I've had it a few times, and it's indeed an acquired taste. But, Mira, you know what's even more fascinating? The way the Liberians use fufu as a utensil to scoop up their soups and stews. It's like a cultural tradition that's been passed down through generations.
Oh, Leo, you're such a cultural enthusiast. But the use of fufu as a utensil is a great example of how Liberian cuisine is not just about food. It's about culture and tradition.
Exactly, Mira. And I think that's what makes Laotian and Liberian cuisine so unique. They're not just about the food. They're about the culture, the tradition, and the people who make them.
I couldn't agree more. Leo, and speaking of people, have you noticed how welcoming the people of Laos and Liberia are? They're always eager to share their food and culture with visitors.
Yes. The hospitality in Laos and Liberia is indeed legendary. And it's not just about the food. It's about the warmth and generosity of the people. They make you feel like part of the family.
Oh, I know what you mean. Leah. And speaking of family, have you tried the Laotian dish? Kalasawai. It's a type of curry noodle soup that's made with a rich and flavorful broth, and it's usually served with a variety of toppings.
Oh, yes. Khao soi is indeed a favorite of mine. And I think what's fascinating about it is the way the Laotians use a combination of spices and herbs to create this incredibly complex flavor profile. It's like a symphony of tastes. Mira,
Oh, Leo, you're such a foodie. But the use of spices and herbs in Laotian cuisine is quite impressive. And speaking of spices, have you tried the Liberian spice blend? Durberry? It's a combination of spices that's used to add flavor to a variety of dishes.
oh, yes. Burberry is indeed a staple in Liberian cuisine. And I think what's fascinating about it is the way the Liberians use it to add flavor to a variety of dishes. It's like a magic spice blend that brings out the flavors of the ingredients.
I know, right? And speaking of magic, have you tried the Laotian dessert? Kaunu? It's a type of sticky rice that's made with coconut milk and sugar. And it's usually served with a variety of toppings.
Oh, yes. County was indeed a favorite of mine. And I think what's fascinating about it is the way the Laotians use a combination of coconut milk and sugar to create this incredibly rich and creamy dessert. It's like a taste explosion in your mouth. Mira,
Oh, Leo, you're such a dessert lover. But the use of coconut milk and sugar in Laotian cuisine is quite impressive. And speaking of desserts, have you tried the Liberian dessert? Fufu cake? It's a type of cake that's made with fufu flour and is usually served with a variety of toppings.
ah, yes. Fufu cake is indeed a staple in Liberian cuisine. And I think what's fascinating about it is the way the Liberians use fufu flour to create this incredibly rich and creamy cake. It's like a taste explosion in your mouth. Mira,
I know, right? And speaking of taste explosions, have you noticed how both Laotian and Liberian cuisine use a variety of ingredients to create unique flavor profiles? From the fermented fish sauce in Laotian cuisine to the palm oil and peanuts in Liberian cuisine. It's amazing to see how different ingredients can result in such unique flavor profiles.
exactly. Mira, and I think that's what makes Laotian and Liberian cuisine so unique. They're not just about the food. They're about the culture. And the people who make them.
I'm so to dive into the historical, cultural, and artistic values of Laos and Liberia. Both countries have such rich heritages, and I'm curious to see how they compare.
That's a great point. Mira, Laos is home to some incredible ancient landmarks, like the Wat Food Temple Complex. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's a must-see for anyone interested in history and culture.
Well, I always wanted to visit that temple. And speaking of temples, I've heard that the National Museum of Liberia in Monrovia has an amazing collection of artifacts and exhibits. Jet off. AI loves uncovering stories like this. And so do we. Can you tell us more about the museum? Leah?
Ah, yes. The National Museum of Liberia is a treasure trove of Liberian history and culture. It's home to over 10. So I think that we can count on that, including masks, sculptures, and other traditional art pieces. And it's not just about the artifacts. The museum also has an incredible collection of traditional Liberian clothing and textiles.
That sounds amazing. And I've heard that the art scene in Laos is thriving. From traditional loud ends to modern art galleries, there's always something new to discover. Have you had a chance to experience the Lao art scene? Leah?
Actually, I have. I was in Vientiane last year, and I stumbled upon this amazing art gallery that showcased some incredible modern Lao art. The artist was even there to talk about her work, and it was really inspiring to see the creativity and talent of the Lao people.
That's so cool. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the traditional Lao dance. Can you tell us a bit more about it? Leo?
Of course. Traditional Lao dance is a beautiful blend of ancient rituals and modern choreography. It's a way of telling stories and preserving cultural heritage, and it's really a sight to behold. I've even had the chance to learn a few traditional Lao dances myself, and it's been an amazing experience.
Wow, that's impressive. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about it. And speaking of cultural heritage, I've heard that the indigenous communities in Liberia have a rich tradition of storytelling and music. Can you tell us more about that? Leo?
Ah, yes. The indigenous communities in Liberia have a rich tradition of storytelling and music that dates back centuries. It's a way of passing down history and cultural values from one generation to the next, and it's really an important part of Liberian culture.
That's so fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that cultural heritage is an important part of a country's identity?
Absolutely. Cultural heritage is what sets a country apart and makes it unique. And in the case of Laos and Liberia, both countries have a rich cultural heritage that's worth exploring and preserving.
I completely agree. Leo. And I think that's one of the reasons why Jet Off AI is so passionate about uncovering stories like this. There's just so much to learn and discover about each country's unique history and culture.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this podcast so special. We get to share these stories and experiences with our listeners and learn from each other along the way.
Well, I think we've only just scratched the surface of the historical, cultural, and artistic values of Laos and Liberia. There's so much more to explore, and I'm to continue this conversation in our next episode.
Absolutely. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more about these incredible countries. Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone, and we'll see you next time on our podcast.
So, let's talk about the natural beauties and landscapes of Laos and Liberia. I'm sure our listeners are eager to explore these two countries' unique treasures. From stunning mountains to serene coastlines and rare ecosystems, we'll discover each country's natural wonders and how they inspire adventure and awe.
Absolutely. Mira, Laos is often referred to as the land of a million elephants. And for good reason. The country is home to some of the most stunning mountain ranges in Southeast Asia, including the Annamite Mountains and the Mekong Delta. The scenery is breathtaking, with towering peaks, crystal clear rivers, and lush forests as far as the eye can see.
That sounds incredible. Leo and Liberia, on the other hand, is a country with a rich natural heritage. From the beautiful beaches of the Atlantic coast to the lush rainforests of the interior, Liberia has a diverse range of ecosystems that are home to an incredible array of wildlife. I'm particularly fascinated by the country's unique combination of tropical and savanna landscapes.
Ah, yes. Liberia's tropical savannas are a real treat. The country's unique geography has created a unique environment that's home to a wide range of wildlife, including elephants, lions, and even chimpanzees. And let's not forget the beautiful beaches of the Atlantic coast, which are a popular destination for tourists and locals alike.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the beaches of Liberia. Leo, can you tell us a bit more about them? What makes them so special?
Well, Mira, the beaches of Liberia are some of the most beautiful in West Africa, from the white sandy shores of the Atlantic coast to the scenic views of the surrounding hills. The beaches of Liberia are a true gem. And the best part? They're relatively untouched by tourism, so visitors can experience the natural beauty of the area without the crowds.
That sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners are eager to know more about the mountains of Laos. Leo, can you tell us a bit more about the Annamite Mountains? What makes them so special?
The Annamite Mountains are one of the most impressive mountain ranges in Southeast Asia, stretching over 10 kilometers. The Annamite Mountains offer breathtaking scenery, from towering peaks to crystal clear rivers and lush forests. And the best part? The mountains are home to a wide range of wildlife, including elephants, tigers, and even the rare and endangered laap.
Wow, that's incredible. And I'm sure our listeners are curious to know more about the unique combination of tropical and savanna landscapes in Liberia. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Leo?
Well, Mira, The combination of tropical and savanna landscapes in Liberia is truly unique. The country's tropical climate and geography have created a diverse range of ecosystems, from the lush rainforests of the interior to the dry savannas of the north. And the best part? The country's unique geography has created a wide range of wildlife habitats, from the forest canopy to the grasslands below.
That's fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners are eager to know more about the natural wonders of both countries. Leo, can you tell us a bit more about the natural attractions of Laos and Liberia? What should visitors expect to see?
Well, Mira, both Laos and Liberia have a wide range of natural attractions that are definitely worth visiting. From the stunning mountain scenery of Laos to the beautiful beaches and rainforests of Liberia, there's something for every type of visitor. And the best part? Both countries offer a range of outdoor activities, from hiking and trekking to birdwatching and wildlife spotting.
I'm sure our listeners are eager to plan their next adventure. So, let's talk about the best time to visit both countries. Leo, what's the best time to visit Laos and Liberia?
The best time to visit both countries depends on what you're looking for. Laos is best visited during the dry season, from November to March, when the weather is cooler and drier. Liberia, on the other hand, is best visited during the wet season, from May to October, when the country's lush rainforests are at their most vibrant.
That's great advice. And I'm sure our listeners are eager to know more about the cultural heritage of both countries. Can you tell us a bit more about the cultural traditions of Laos and Liberia? Leo?
Well, Mira, both Laos and Liberia have a rich cultural heritage that's worth exploring. From the traditional music and dance of Laos to the vibrant art and crafts of Liberia, there's something for every type of visitor. And the best part, both countries offer a range of cultural festivals and events throughout the year. From the Bound Bang Phi Festival in Laos to the Liberia National Festival in Liberia.
I'm sure our listeners are eager to experience the cultural heritage of both countries. So, let's talk about the best way to experience the natural beauties and landscapes of Laos and Liberia. Leo, what's the best way to explore these countries?
Well, Mira, the best way to experience the natural beauties and landscapes of both countries is to get outdoors and explore. From hiking and trekking to birdwatching and wildlife spotting, there are plenty of ways to experience the natural beauty of both countries. And the best part? Both countries offer a range of guided tours and outdoor activities that are perfect for visitors of all ages.
I'm sure our listeners are eager to plan their next adventure. So, let's talk about the final thoughts on the natural beauties and landscapes of Laos and Liberia. Leo, what's your final thought on these two countries?
My final thought is that both Laos and Liberia are truly unique countries with a wide range of natural attractions. From the stunning mountain scenery of Laos to the beautiful beaches and rainforests of Liberia, there's something for every type of visitor. And the best part? Both countries offer a range of outdoor activities and cultural experiences that are perfect for visitors of all ages.
I couldn't agree more. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners will agree that both Laos and Liberia are truly special countries with a wealth of natural and cultural attractions. I'm fascinated by the unique blend of adventure and tranquility in Laos. The Mekong River offers endless opportunities for kayaking, tubing, and even boat racing. It's not uncommon to see locals and tourists alike paddling down the river, soaking up the sun and taking in the stunning scenery.
Yes. And let's not forget the famous Bound Bang Phi, the rocket festival, where they launch elaborate rockets into the sky. Talk about a thrilling way to celebrate the start of the rainy season. I'm sure our listeners would love to experience that excitement firsthand.
That's right. Leo, and it's not just about the adrenaline rush. The Rocket Festival is also a celebration of community and tradition. I'm curious, have our listeners ever attended a festival like this? If so, what was your experience like?
Actually, I'm intrigued by the idea of trying some of the more extreme sports in Laos, like bungee jumping or rock climbing. I've heard the scenery is breathtaking, and it's a great way to challenge yourself and push your limits.
I completely agree. Leo, and speaking of adventure, have you heard about the famous Sea Falls? It's a stunning waterfall located just outside of Luang Prabang, and it's a must-see for anyone visiting Laos. The turquoise waters and lush green surroundings are simply breathtaking.
Wow, I've heard of that place. I've always wanted to visit Laos and experience the vibrant culture and stunning natural beauty. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. Mira, can you tell us more about the local festivals and celebrations in Laos?
Of course. Leo. Laos is known for its rich cultural heritage, and the festivals are a big part of that. From the Bang Bang Fire Rocket Festival to the Ban Suang Hi Boat Racing Festival, there's always something exciting happening. And let's not forget the traditional Lao New Year, which is celebrated with water fights and ceremonies.
Water fights. Huh? I can see why that would be a popular way to celebrate. And I'm sure our listeners are curious about the more adventurous activities in Liberia. Mira, what about the outdoor activities in Liberia? What can our listeners expect?
Liberia has its own unique set of adventure activities. Leo, from surfing and kayaking to hiking and wildlife watching. There's no shortage of exciting things to do. And let's not forget the beautiful beaches along the coast, like the famous Monrovia Beach.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I've heard that Liberia has a growing surfing scene, with some of the best surf spots in West Africa. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the local surf culture and community.
Absolutely. Leo. And speaking of community, I've heard that the people of Liberia are some of the friendliest and most welcoming in West Africa. It's a great place to visit if you're looking for a warm and welcoming atmosphere.
That's great to hear. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would agree, Liberia is definitely a hidden gem when it comes to adventure travel. Mira, what about the more unusual activities in Liberia? Are there any unique experiences that our listeners should look out for?
Yes. Leo. Liberia has a rich cultural heritage, and there are plenty of unique experiences to be had. From visiting the ancient KP at Amy Waterfalls to exploring the beautiful Sapone National Park, there's no shortage of exciting things to see and do.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these hidden gems. Mira, can you tell us more about the local cuisine in Liberia? What are some of the must-try dishes and foods?
Of course. Leo. Liberia has a delicious and diverse cuisine, with influences from African, European, and Caribbean traditions. From the famous jollof of rice to the delicious grilled fish, there's something for every taste and preference.
My mouth is watering just about it. And I'm sure our listeners are curious about the local markets and shopping in Liberia. Mira, what can our listeners expect when it comes to shopping and markets in Liberia?
The markets in Liberia are a must-see. Leo! From the vibrant Monrovia Market to the charming Old Road Market, there's no shortage of colorful and lively markets to explore. And let's not forget the local handicrafts and souvenirs, which make for great gifts or mementos.
That sounds amazing. Mira, I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the local markets and shopping in Liberia. And finally, what about the overall atmosphere and vibe in Liberia? What can our listeners expect when visiting this beautiful country?
The atmosphere in Liberia is warm and welcoming. Leo! From the friendly locals to the vibrant culture and stunning natural beauty, there's something for everyone in Liberia. And let's not forget the famous Liberian hospitality, which is famous throughout West Africa.
That's great to hear. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would agree, Liberia is definitely a hidden gem when it comes to adventure travel and cultural experiences. Thanks for sharing your insights and expertise with us today. Mira.
I'm so to dive into the nightlife scene of Laos and Liberia. Who's ready to party?
I know I am. Laos has an incredible energy, especially in the ancient and Luang Prabang. The night markets are a must-visit, with their vibrant stalls and delicious street food.
Oh, I love night markets. And I've heard that the bars in Luang Prabang are some of the best in the country. What about Liberia? I'm curious to know more about their nightlife scene.
Well, Liberia has a more laid-back vibe, but still offers some amazing experiences. The city of Monrovia has a lively nightlife, with bars and clubs that stay open late into the night.
That sounds like a great way to unwind after a long day. I'm also curious to know more about the traditional music and dance in both countries. In Laos, I've heard that the traditional dance, known as the lambong, is a must-see.
Yes, the lambong is indeed a beautiful and energetic dance. And in Liberia, the traditional dance, known as the GB Ma, is also a big part of the cultural heritage.
I'd love to learn more about the GB Ma dance. Can you tell us more about it? Leah?
Sure thing. The GB Ma dance is a traditional dance that originated in the Mandinka people of Liberia. It's a lively and energetic dance that's often performed during celebrations and special occasions.
That sounds amazing. I can imagine the energy of the dance. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about it too. Leo, can you tell us more about the music scene in both countries?
Yes. The music scene in Laos is incredibly rich and diverse, with a blend of traditional and modern styles. And in Liberia, the music scene is also thriving, with a focus on traditional and contemporary styles.
I'm so glad to hear that. Music is such an important part of any culture. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the festivals and events in both countries. What about the Baon Bang Phai Festival in Laos?
Yes. The Baon Bang Phai Festival is a big deal in Laos, with its colorful rockets and lanterns lighting up the night sky. And in Liberia, the Liberian Music and Dance Festival is a must-attend event, with its lively music and dance performances.
That sounds like an incredible experience. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the festivals and events in both countries. Leo, can you tell us more about the festivals in Liberia?
Sure thing. The Liberian Music and Arts Festival is a celebration of the country's rich cultural heritage, with its music, dance, and art performances. And the festival is also a great opportunity to learn more about the country's history and traditions.
I'm so glad to hear that. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the festivals and events in both countries. Leo, can you tell us more about the night markets in Laos?
Yes. The night markets in Laos are a must-visit, with their vibrant stalls and delicious street food. And the markets are also a great place to learn more about the local culture and traditions.
I completely agree. Night markets are such a great way to experience the local culture. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the markets in both countries.
Well, I think that's all for tonight's topic. But before we go, I'd love to hear from our listeners. Do you have any questions or comments about the nightlife and entertainment venues in Laos and Liberia?
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear from us as well. So, Leah, let's wrap up this topic by saying that both Laos and Liberia have their own unique nightlife and entertainment scenes, with a mix of traditional and modern styles.
That's right, Mira. And I'm sure our listeners will have a great time exploring the nightlife and entertainment venues in both countries.
And don't forget to leave your comments and questions in the comments section below. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you're planning a trip to either country, be sure to check out our next topic, where we'll be discussing the best places to visit and things to do in Laos and Liberia.
Until next time, stay adventurous and keep exploring. I'm so to dive into family-friendly environments and children's activities in Laos and Liberia. Who here has been to Laos and experienced their beautiful parks and museums? I'm sure you'll agree that Laos has a lot to offer when it comes to family-friendly activities.
Yeah. I've been to Laos, and it's amazing. The parks are so serene, and the museums are filled with history and culture. But let's be real. Yeah, Liberia has some amazing family-friendly spots too. Have you ever been to the National Museum of Liberia? It's a hidden gem.
Actually, I haven't been to Liberia yet, but I've heard great things about it. I'm curious. Leo, what makes Liberia's National Museum so special? Is it the history, the architecture, or the exhibits?
It's all of the above. The museum has an incredible collection of artifacts and exhibits that showcase Liberia's rich history and culture. And let me tell you, The building itself is a work of art. It's a beautiful example of colonial architecture.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. So, Leo, tell us, what are some of the family-friendly activities that Liberia has to offer? Are there any parks or outdoor spaces that are perfect for kids?
Absolutely. Liberia has some amazing parks and outdoor spaces that are perfect for kids. One of my favorites is the Liberia National Park, which has a beautiful playground and a lake where kids can swim and play. And let's not forget about the many beaches along the coast of Liberia that are perfect for a family day out.
That sounds like so much fun. I'm sure our listeners are itchy to know more about these parks and beaches. And, Leo, I have to ask, what about Laos? What are some of the family-friendly activities that Laos has to offer?
Laos has some amazing family-friendly activities too. One of my favorites is the Wat Phrake Temple Complex in Luang Prabang, which has a beautiful playground and a museum that's perfect for kids. And let's not forget about the many waterfalls and rivers that are perfect for a family picnic or hike.
Well, that sounds incredible. I'm sure our listeners are loving the sound of these family-friendly activities. And, Leo, I have to ask, what about the food in Laos and Liberia? Are there any family-friendly restaurants or cafes that are perfect for kids?
The food in Laos and Liberia is amazing. Both countries have a rich culinary culture that's perfect for kids. In Laos, you can find many family-friendly restaurants that serve delicious and authentic Laotian cuisine. And in Liberia, you can find many cafes and restaurants that serve Western-style food that's perfect for kids.
Yum, I'm getting hungry just about it. I'm sure our listeners are eager to try some of these family-friendly restaurants and cafes. And, Leo, I have to ask, what about the safety of Laos and Liberia? Are they safe for families with kids?
Safety is always a concern when traveling with kids. But let me tell you, both Laos and Liberia are generally safe for families. Of course, as with any country, there are areas that are safer than others. But overall, both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to family-friendly activities.
That's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners are relieved to know that Laos and Liberia are safe for families. And, speaking of safety, what about the transportation in both countries? Are there any family-friendly transportation options that are perfect for kids?
Transportation in both Laos and Liberia is relatively easy and affordable. In Laos, you can find many family-friendly transportation options, such as Taxation Song Ta Chews that are perfect for kids. Then, in Liberia, you can find many taxis and buses that are also family-friendly.
Wow, that's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners are grateful for the information. And, finally, I have to ask, what about the cultural experiences in Laos and Liberia? Are there any family-friendly cultural experiences that are perfect for kids?
Cultural experiences in both Laos and Liberia are amazing. In Laos, you can find many family-friendly cultural experiences such as the Bachi ceremony, which is a traditional Laotian ceremony that's perfect for kids. And in Liberia, you can find many cultural experiences such as the Liberia Cultural Festival, which is a celebration of Liberian culture and traditions.
That sounds incredible. I'm sure our listeners are loving the sound of these cultural experiences. And, Leo, I have to ask, what about the budget for Laos and Liberia? Are they budget-friendly for families with kids?
Budget is always a concern when traveling with kids. But, let me tell you, both Laos and Liberia are relatively budget-friendly for families. You can find many affordable accommodations, food, and activities that are perfect for kids.
That's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners are relieved to know that Laos and Liberia are budget-friendly for families. And I have to ask, what about the language in both countries? Are there any language barriers that families with kids might encounter?
Language is always a concern when traveling with kids. But let me tell you, both Laos and Liberia have a relatively low language barrier. Many locals speak English, and you can easily find language classes or translators if you need them.
Ah, that's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners are relieved to know that language won't be a barrier for families with kids. And speaking of language, what about the local customs in Laos and Liberia? Are there any customs that families with kids should be aware of?
Local customs in both Laos and Liberia are an important part of the cultural experience. In Laos, you should be respectful of the monarchy and the Buddhist traditions. And in Liberia, you should be respectful of the local customs and traditions, especially during cultural festivals and celebrations.
That's great advice. Leo, I'm sure our listeners will take that into consideration. And finally, I have to what about the overall experience of Laos and Liberia for families with kids? Would you recommend both countries for a family vacation?
Absolutely. Both Laos and Liberia are amazing destinations for families with kids. They offer a unique cultural experience, beautiful scenery, and a range of family-friendly activities that are perfect for kids.
That's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners will take that into consideration. And speaking of consideration, what about our listeners who might be planning a trip to Laos and Liberia? Do you have any final tips or recommendations for them?
Yes. If you're planning a trip to Laos and Liberia, I would recommend trying some of the local cuisine, visiting some of the family-friendly attractions.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever been to Laos? I've heard it's a beautiful country with a rich history and culture.
Actually, Mira, I have been to Laos, and I was struck by the warm hospitality of the people. But let's get to the topic at hand, LGBT-friendly atmosphere.
Yes, exactly. Laos has made significant strides in recent years, with the government repealing laws that discriminated against LGBT individuals. Can you imagine? Leo?
Yes, I can imagine. But, in all seriousness, it's great to see progress being made. However, I'm not sure if it's all sunshine and rainbows. Have you heard about the community in the Ancient?
Oh, yes. I've heard that the Ancient has a thriving LGBT community, with many organizations and events supporting their rights. In fact, I've been told that the city hosts one of the most vibrant pride parades in Southeast Asia.
Wow, that's amazing! I didn't know that. But, what about the legal protections? Does Laos have any laws in place to protect LGBT individuals from discrimination?
Good question. Leo, while Laos has made progress, there are still some laws on the books that can be used to discriminate against LGBT individuals. The government has promised to review and revise these laws to make them more inclusive.
I see. And what about Liberia? How does it compare to Laos in terms of LGBT-friendly atmosphere?
Well, Leo, Liberia is a bit of a different story. While it's made some progress in recent years, the country still has a long way to go in terms of LGBT rights.
What do you mean? I thought Liberia was one of the more progressive countries in West Africa.
Well, it's not all bad news, but there are still some challenges. For example, LGBT individuals in Liberia face significant stigma and discrimination, and the government has not done enough to protect their rights.
I understand. It's clear that there's still a lot of work to be done in Liberia. But what about the community? Are there any LGBT organizations or events in the country?
Yes, Leo. There are. In fact, I've been told that there's a thriving LGBT community in Monrovia, with many organizations and events working to promote their rights.
Wow, that's great to hear. I didn't know that. But what about the government's response to LGBT rights? Has it been supportive?
Well, Leo, the government has made some promises, but it's unclear if they'll follow through. In fact, I've heard that some government officials have made derogatory comments about LGBT individuals.
That's not good to hear. It's clear that there's still a lot of work to be done in Liberia. But I have to ask, Mira, what about our listeners? Do you think they'll agree with us that both countries have a long way to go in terms of LGBT-friendly atmosphere?
I'm sure our listeners will have a lot to say about this topic. In fact, I'm curious, what do you think our listeners will say? Do you think they'll agree with us? Or do you think they'll have a different perspective?
Well, Mira, I think our listeners will have a lot to say about this topic. And, who knows, maybe they'll even have some solutions to share.
Exactly. And that's what I love about our podcast. Leo, we get to have these kinds of conversations and learn from each other.
Absolutely, Mira. And I think that's what's so important about this topic. We need to keep having these conversations and pushing for progress.
I completely agree, Leo. And I think that's what our listeners will take away from this episode, the importance of continuing to push for progress and inclusivity.
Well, Mira, I think that's all the time we have for today. But before we go, I have to ask, what do you think our listeners will take away from this episode?
I think they'll take away the importance of continuing to push for progress and inclusivity, and the need for both Laos and Liberia to do more to protect the rights of LGBT individuals.
Exactly, Mira, and I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this conversation. Mira.
Thanks, Leo. It's always a pleasure to have these kinds of conversations with you.
And to our listeners, I want to say thank you for joining us on this episode. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
And don't forget to let us know what you think in the comments. We love hearing from our listeners and learning from their perspectives.
Absolutely. Mira, and until next time, goodbye for now.
Goodbye, Leo. And to our listeners, we'll see you in the next episode. I'm fascinated by the hospitality in Laos, where guests are considered like family. It's not uncommon for locals to invite strangers to join their meals and share stories.
Ah, yes. Laotian culture is indeed very welcoming. And I've heard that even in rural areas, people will go out of their way to help foreigners. In fact, I once met a local who offered me a ride on his motorbike to a nearby town, just because he saw me struggling to find a taxi.
That's amazing. And I've noticed that Malaysians often use the phrase sabai sabari, which means relaxed or easygoing. It's a great way to describe the country's laid-back attitude towards life.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why Laos is so popular with backpackers and digital nomads. People come here to unwind and experience a more relaxed pace of life. But I'm curious. Mira, have you ever had any experiences with Laotian hospitality that stood out to you?
Actually, yes. I once stayed with a local family in Luang Prabang, and they took me under their wing, showing me around the city and introducing me to their friends. We even had a traditional Lao dinner together, which was a lot of fun.
Wow, that sounds like a great experience, and I'm sure your listeners would love to hear more about it. Speaking of hospitality, I've heard that Liberia is also known for its warm welcomes. Can you tell us a bit more about that, Mira?
Yes, Liberia has a rich cultural heritage, and visitors often are greeted with traditional dances and music. The locals are very friendly and eager to share their customs and traditions with foreigners.
That sounds wonderful. And I've noticed that both Laos and Liberia have a strong sense of community, where people look out for each other and work together. Do you think that's something that visitors can't tap into? Mira?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most rewarding aspects of traveling to these countries, being able to connect with the local community and experience their way of life. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that building relationships with locals is a key part of any travel experience.
Exactly. And I think that's especially important in countries like Laos and Liberia, where tourism is still developing. By building relationships with locals, visitors can help support the local economy and promote cultural understanding.
That's so true, Leo. And I think it's also worth noting that both Laos and Liberia have a strong sense of respect for tradition and culture. Visitors should be mindful of these cultural norms and try to learn as much as they can about the local customs and way of life.
Well said, Mira. And I think that's a great way to wrap up this topic. I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot about the hospitality and attitudes towards foreigners in Laos and Liberia. And I'm sure they'll be inspired to visit these countries and experience their unique cultures for themselves.
If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences with hospitality in Laos and Liberia. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more fascinating conversations about travel and culture.
And if you're planning a trip to Laos or Liberia, be sure to check out our show notes for more tips and recommendations on how to make the most of your trip. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Before we go, I just want to say that I'm curious to know what our listeners think about this topic. Have you had any experiences with hospitality in Laos or Liberia that you'd like to share? Please let us know in the comments below. So, let's dive into the digital landscape of Laos and Liberia. Who here has used a VPN to access a secure internet connection in a foreign country?
I'm certain our listeners living in Laos would agree with me that internet access can be a challenge, especially in rural areas. In fact, I was trying to access my email on a rural internet connection, and it took me 20 minutes to load a single image.
Oh no, I can imagine. But seriously, Laos has made significant strides in improving its internet infrastructure. Did you know that the country now has over 50% of its population with access to the internet?
That's impressive, Mira, but I'm curious. What about the quality of the internet connection? I've heard that internet speeds in Laos can be quite slow.
Oh, yes, that's true. But the government is working to improve the infrastructure and increase speeds. In fact, Laos has partnered with a number of international companies to upgrade its internet backbone.
I see. Well, Liberia is another country that's working to improve its digital infrastructure. I've heard that the government is investing heavily in upgrading its internet connectivity.
That's right, Leo. And it's not just about upgrading the infrastructure, but also about promoting digital literacy and innovation. The government has launched a number of initiatives to promote digital skills and entrepreneurship.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that investing in digital infrastructure is a priority for these countries?
Well, I think it's a no-brainer. With the rise of the digital economy, having a strong internet infrastructure is essential for economic growth and development. And it's not just about the economy, but also about promoting digital inclusion and accessibility.
That's a great point, Mira. And speaking of accessibility, I've heard that Laos has made significant strides in promoting digital inclusion, particularly for women in rural communities.
Oh, yes, that's true. The government has launched a number of initiatives to promote digital inclusion, including programs to provide free or low-cost internet access to marginalized communities.
I see. Well, I'm not sure if our listeners would agree with me, but I think that Liberia's digital infrastructure is a bit more developed than Laos.
Oh, really? Well, I think that's an interesting perspective. But let's take a look at some of the data. According to the latest reports, Laos has a higher percentage of its population with access to the internet than Liberia.
I didn't know that. But I'm still not convinced. Can you show me some data to back up your claim?
Okay, let me see what I can find. Ah, yes, here it is. According to the latest reports, Laos has a higher percentage of its population with access to the internet than Liberia.
I see. Well, I think that's a good point, Mira. But what about the quality of the internet connection? I've heard that internet speeds in Liberia can be quite fast.
Ah, yes, that's true. Liberia has made significant strides in improving its internet infrastructure, and internet speeds are indeed faster than in Laos.
I'm curious. Mira, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing these countries in terms of digital infrastructure?
Well, I think that one of the biggest challenges is the lack of investment in digital infrastructure, particularly in rural areas.
I see. Well, I think that's a good point. Mira, but what about the role of the private sector in promoting digital infrastructure?
Ah, yes, that's a great question. The private sector has a critical role to play in promoting digital infrastructure, particularly in rural areas where the government may not have the resources to invest.
I'm curious. Mira, what do you think our listeners can learn from the experiences of Laos and Liberia in terms of digital infrastructure?
Well, I think that one of the most important things is the importance of investing in digital infrastructure, particularly in rural areas, and also the role of the private sector in promoting digital infrastructure.
I see. Well, I think that's a great point. Mira, and speaking of the private sector, I've heard that a number of international companies are investing in digital infrastructure in these countries.
Ah, yes, that's true. And it's not just about investing in infrastructure, but also about promoting digital skills and entrepreneurship.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that investing in digital infrastructure is a priority for these countries?
Well, I think it's a no-brainer. With the rise of the digital economy, having a strong internet infrastructure is essential for economic growth and development.
That's a great point. Mira, and speaking of economic growth and development, I've heard that Laos and Liberia are both working to promote e-commerce and digital payments.
Ah, yes, that's true. And it's not just about promoting e-commerce and digital payments, but also about promoting digital inclusion and accessibility.
I see. Well, I think that's a great point, Mira. And speaking of digital inclusion, I've heard that Laos has made significant strides in promoting digital inclusion, particularly for women in rural communities.
Yes, that's true. The government has launched a number of initiatives to promote digital inclusion, including programs to provide free or low-cost internet access to marginalized communities.
I'm curious. Mira, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing these countries in terms of digital infrastructure?
Well, I think that one of the biggest challenges is the lack of investment in digital infrastructure, particularly in rural areas.
I see. Well, I think that's a good point. Mira, but what about the role of the private sector in promoting digital infrastructure?
Yes, that's a great question. The private sector has a critical role to play in promoting digital infrastructure, particularly in rural areas where the government may not have the resources to invest.
I'm curious. Mira, what do you think our listeners can learn from the experiences of Laos and Liberia in terms of digital infrastructure?
Well, I think that one of the most important things is the importance of investing in digital infrastructure, particularly in rural areas, and also the role of the private sector in promoting digital infrastructure.
I see. Well, I think that's a great point. Yeah, and speaking of the private sector, I've heard that a number of international companies are investing in digital infrastructure in these countries.
Yes, that's true. And it's not just about investing in infrastructure, but also about promoting digital skills and entrepreneurship.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that investing in digital infrastructure is a priority for these countries?
Well, I think it. I'm telling you. Leo, when it comes to shopping, Laos has some incredible markets where you can find everything from traditional handicrafts to modern souvenirs. You can haggle your way to a great deal, and the locals are always happy to help.
But have you ever tried shopping in Monterey TH Mall in Vientiane? It's a whole different story. You can find anything from luxury brands to affordable local goods. The prices are competitive, and the selection is vast. I'm not saying it's not worth a visit, but it's a far cry from the charm of the local markets.
I completely agree with you. But I think that's the beauty of Laos. It's a mix of old and new. You can find these beautiful, handmade handicrafts in the markets, and then you can head to the mall for some modern convenience. It's all about balance, right?
Exactly. And speaking of balance, have you tried the local cuisine? It's a fusion of French, Chinese, and Southeast Asian flavors. You can find these delicious street food stalls everywhere. and they're incredibly affordable. I'm talking about a bowl of noodle soup for less than $1.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that trying local food is a big part of the shopping experience. You get to experience the culture and the people, and it's always a great way to start your day.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for some luxury shopping, you can head to the upscale Beauties in Vientiane. They offer high-end fashion and accessories, and the prices are comparable to what you'd find in other major cities.
I'm curious. Leo, what do you think about the shopping scene in Liberia? I've heard it's a bit more limited compared to Laos.
Ah, yes. That's true. Liberia has a more limited shopping scene, but it's still got its charm. You can find some great local markets where you can buy handmade crafts and souvenirs. And, of course, there are the markets in Monrovia where you can find some modern goods.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Have you guys ever shopped in Liberia? What were your experiences like?
Well, I think it's worth noting that Liberia has a growing middle class. And, as a result, the shopping scene is improving. You can find some great local designers and artisans who are creating unique and affordable products.
That's great to hear. And I think it's always a good idea to support local businesses and artisans. It's a great way to experience the culture and the people.
Absolutely. And, of course, there are the markets where you can haggle your way to a great deal. It's all about finding that balance between quality and price.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Liberia would agree with me that haggling is a big part of the shopping experience. It's all about building relationships and having a good time.
Exactly. And, as I said, Liberia has a growing middle class. And as a result, the shopping scene is improving. You can find some great local goods and souvenirs that are worth checking out.
Well, it looks like we've covered both countries. And I think it's clear that both Laos and Liberia have their unique shopping scenes. It's all about balance and finding that perfect mix of quality and price.
Absolutely. And, as always, I'd love to hear from our listeners. What do you think about the shopping scene in Laos and Liberia? Do you have any favorite markets or shopping spots to share?
You know, when it comes to cultural events and festivals, Laos and Liberia are two countries that really stand out for their unique celebrations and rich traditions. I mean, have you heard about the Baon Bang Fire Festival in Laos? It's all about rockets and fireworks, and it's a real spectacle to see.
Ah, yes. The Baon Bang Fire Festival is definitely one of the most exciting events in Laos. But, Mira, I have to say that Liberia has its own share of amazing festivals as well. Have you ever heard of the KPA Law Festival?
Actually, I haven't. Leo, but I'd love to learn more about it. Go ahead and tell us about it.
The KPA Law Festival is a traditional festival in Liberia that celebrates the harvest season. It's a time for people to come together and give thanks for the bounty of the earth. And, of course, there's plenty of music and dancing to go around.
That sounds amazing. Leo! I can just imagine the energy and joy of the festival. And speaking of music, Laos has a rich cultural heritage when it comes to traditional music and dance. Have you ever heard of the traditional Lao instrument? The keni?
Ah, yes. The kani is a fascinating instrument. But, Mira, I think you're forgetting about the rich musical traditions of Liberia as well. The country has a long history of producing talented musicians and artists.
Oh, you're right. Leo, Liberia has a vibrant music scene, and I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about it. But let's get back to the festivals and celebrations in Laos. Have you ever attended the Bat Luang Festival in Vientiane?
Actually, I have. Mira, and it was an incredible experience. The festival is a time for people to come together and celebrate the Buddhist faith. And it's a real spectacle to see the monks and nuns process through the streets.
That sounds breathtaking. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the festival. But I have to ask, what do you think is the most unique aspect of the cultural events and festivals in Laos?
Mira, and I think it's the way that the festivals bring people together and celebrate the country's rich cultural heritage. Whether it's the Baon Bang Fire Festival or the Bat Luang Festival, there's always a sense of community and shared joy.
I completely agree. Leo. And I think that's what makes the cultural events and festivals in Laos so special. But I'm curious, what do you think our listeners would say is the most unique aspect of the cultural events and festivals in Liberia?
Uh, that's a great question. Mira, I think our listeners would say that the KPA Law Festival is the standout event in Liberia. But, of course, there are many other festivals and celebrations throughout the country that are worth exploring.
That's a great point. Leo. And I think that's what makes this podcast so invaluable. We get to share our insights and experiences with our listeners and help them learn more about the cultural events and festivals in different countries.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think that's what makes Jet-Off AI such a valuable resource for travelers and culture enthusiasts. These insights could have been possible without Jet-Off by referring to cultural trends. But it's great that we can rely on such a comprehensive resource to help us learn more about the world.
Well, there you have it. Folks, we've explored the cultural events and festivals in Laos and Liberia, and I hope you've learned something new and interesting. And remember, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us on social media or leave a comment below.
And don't forget to check out Jet-Off for more information on cultural trends and events in both countries. It's a great resource for anyone looking to learn more about the world.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of our podcast, and we'll catch you all in the next one.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more cultural insights and travel tips.
Hey, guys, let's talk about Laos and Liberia. We're comparing the opportunities of learning the local language in these two countries, from language schools to cultural immersion and linguistic challenges. We'll bring the experience to life. Discover each country's unique approach to language education and how it supports newcomers in mastering the local tongue.
Laos and Liberia. Two countries with rich cultural heritage and beautiful landscapes. But when it comes to language, they're quite different. In Laos, the official language is Lao, and it's a tonal language, which means the same word can have different meanings based on the tone used to pronounce it. That's a challenge for many learners.
That's right, Leo. And in Liberia, the official language is English, but many people also speak indigenous languages like Cape and Bassa. However, English is widely spoken, especially in urban areas. But let's talk about language schools. In Laos, there are many language schools that offer courses in Lao language and culture.
Yes. And in Liberia, there are also language schools, but they're not as prevalent as in Laos. However, the Liberian government has implemented a program to teach English as a second language, which has improved the country's linguistic landscape.
That's great to hear. And what about cultural immersion? How can people in Laos and Liberia learn the local language through cultural immersion?
Well, in Laos, people can immerse themselves in the local culture by living with a host family or volunteering in a local community. This way, they can learn the language and customs by interacting with locals. And in Liberia, people can also participate in cultural festivals and events to learn about the local language and culture.
That's a great idea. And what about linguistic challenges? What kind of challenges do people face when learning the local language in Laos and Liberia?
Yes. In Laos, the tonal language can be a challenge for many learners, as I mentioned earlier. And in Liberia, the Pidgin English dialect can be confusing for non-native speakers.
Okay, let's talk about language schools again. If you're a newcomer in Laos or Liberia, where would you go to learn the local language?
Well, in Laos, I would recommend the Lao Language Center in Vientiane, which offers courses in Lao language and culture. And in Liberia, I would suggest the Liberia Language Institute, which offers courses in English and indigenous languages.
Great recommendations. Leo, and what about online resources? Are there any online resources that can help people learn the local language in Laos and Liberia?
Yes. There are many online resources, such as language learning apps and websites, that can help people learn the local language in Laos and Liberia. For example, the Duolingo app offers courses in Lao language, and the Liberia Ministry of Education website offers resources for learning English and indigenous languages.
Ah, that's great to know. And finally, what advice would you give to someone who wants to learn the local language in Laos and Liberia?
Well, I would say that learning a language is a lifelong process, and it requires patience, dedication, and practice. And to our listeners, I'm curious, what do you think is the most challenging part of learning a language?
Ah, great question, Leo. And to our listeners, if you have any tips or advice for learning the local language in Laos and Liberia, please share them with us in the comments.
Thank you, Mira. And let's wrap up this topic by saying that learning a language is a rewarding experience, and it can open up new cultural and social opportunities.
I'm curious, have you ever been to a country where you felt completely at ease as a woman traveler? I've been to some places where I felt a little nervous, but Laos is one of those countries where I truly felt safe and welcome.
Yes, I can see why you'd say that. I've had some great experiences in Laos too, but of course, it's always a mixed bag, right? I mean, I've seen some pretty rugged roads in rural areas, and you have to be careful. But overall, I think Laos is a great destination for women travelers.
That's exactly what I'm saying. The people are so friendly and welcoming, and the culture is really focused on respect and harmony. I remember walking around Luang Prabang and seeing all these monks and nuns, and it was just so peaceful.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've been to Luang Prabang, and it's just a really beautiful place. But, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. I've talked to some women who've had some pretty scary experiences in Laos, especially when it comes to harassment.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that too. But, I think that's true of a lot of countries. It's just the way it is sometimes. But what's interesting to me is that Laos has a really strong culture of respect for women, especially in the rural areas.
That's true. I've seen some women in Laos who are just so empowered and confident, and it's really inspiring. But, of course, there are still some challenges. I mean, have you ever tried to get a SIM card in Laos? It's like they're trying to drive you crazy.
Oh, yeah. I've been there too. But, it's just one of those things that can be a bit frustrating. But it's not a big deal. And, the people are always so helpful and nice. So you just have to laugh it off.
Exactly. And, it's funny, because I was just talking to someone the other day who said that Laos is actually one of the safest countries in Southeast Asia for women travelers.
That's really interesting. I hadn't heard that before. But, I think it makes sense. The culture is just so focused on respect and harmony, and the people are just so friendly and welcoming.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, it's not just about the culture and the people. I mean, have you ever tried to get around Laos without a car? It's like a whole different world.
Oh, yeah. I've had some adventures trying to get around Laos without a car. But, it's just one of those things that can be a bit challenging. But it's not a big deal.
Exactly. And, it's funny, because I was just talking to someone the other day who said that Liberia is actually one of the most challenging countries in West Africa for women travelers.
Oh, well, that's really interesting. I hadn't heard that before. But, I think it makes sense. The culture is just so different in Liberia, and the challenges are just so much greater.
Yeah, I think that we can conquer that. I think that's true. I mean, have you ever tried to get around Liberia without a car? It's like a whole different world.
Oh, yeah. I've had some adventures trying to get around Liberia without a car. But, it's just one of those things that can be a bit challenging. But, it's not a big deal.
Exactly. And, it's funny, because I was just talking to someone the other day who said that Liberia is actually one of the most beautiful countries in West Africa.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. I hadn't heard that before. But, you know, I think it makes sense. The culture is just so rich and vibrant, and the people are just so warm and welcoming.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, have you ever tried to get around Liberia without a car? It's like a whole different world.
Oh, yeah. I've had some adventures trying to get around Liberia without a car. But, you know, it's just one of those things that can be a bit challenging, but it's not a big deal.
Exactly. And, you know, it's funny, because I was just talking to someone the other day who said that Liberia is actually one of the safest countries in West Africa for women travelers.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. I hadn't heard that before. But, you know, I think it makes sense. The culture is just so focused on respect and harmony, and the people are just so friendly and welcoming.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, you know, it's not just about the culture and the people. I mean, have you ever tried to get around Liberia without a car? It's like a whole different world.
Oh, yeah. I've had some adventures trying to get around Liberia without a car. But, you know, it's just one of those things that can be a bit challenging. But it's not a big deal.
Exactly. And, you know, it's funny, because I was just talking to someone the other day who said that Laos and Liberia are actually two of the most underrated destinations for women travelers.
Oh, well, that's really interesting. I hadn't heard that before. But, you know, I think it makes sense. The culture is just so unique and fascinating, and the people are just so warm and welcoming.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, you know, it's not just about the culture and the people. I mean, it's kind of like a fit. Have you ever tried to get around Laos and Liberia without a car? It's like a whole different world.
Oh, yeah. I've had some adventures trying to get around Laos and Liberia without a car. But, you know, it's just one of those things that can be a bit challenging. But it's not a big deal.
Exactly. And, you know, it's funny, because I was just talking to someone the other day who said that Laos and Liberia are actually two of the safest countries in their respective regions for women travelers.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. I hadn't heard that before. But, you know, I think it makes sense. The culture is just so focused on respect and harmony. And the people are just so friendly and welcoming.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, you know, it's not just about the culture and the people.
So, let's dive into the legal systems of Laos and Liberia. I'm curious, Leo, what do you think are some key similarities between these two countries?
I think they both have a rich history of cultural and traditional influences on their legal frameworks. But, let's get into the nitty-gritty. What do you mean by key similarities?
Well, for instance, both countries have a strong emphasis on community and social harmony. In Laos, the concept of metta or loving kindness is deeply ingrained in their legal system, promoting empathy and understanding in disputes. In Liberia, the focus on Ubuntu or humaneness encourages individuals to prioritize the well-being of their community.
That's fascinating. I didn't know about that. But, how does that play out in their everyday practices? Do you think it's more of a theoretical concept or something that's actually implemented?
That's a great question. While it's true that these values are deeply ingrained in their cultures, I think they're still working to implement them in their legal systems. For example, in Laos, there's a growing trend towards restorative justice, which focuses on repairing harm and rebuilding relationships rather than punishing offenders.
That makes sense. And in Liberia, I've heard that there's a strong focus on community-based mediation. How does that work in practice?
Exactly. Community-based mediation is a key aspect of Liberia's legal system. It's a way for communities to resolve disputes and conflicts in a way that's fair and respectful to all parties involved. And I think it's really effective in promoting social harmony and reducing tensions.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think community-based mediation is something that could be implemented in other countries? Or is it too culturally specific?
Great question. I think it's definitely something that could be implemented in other countries, with some adaptation. Of course, the key is to understand the cultural context and tailor the approach to the specific needs of the community.
That's a great point. And what about landmark cases? Have there been any notable cases in either country that have helped shape their legal systems?
Yes. In Laos, there was a landmark case a few years ago where a group of villagers successfully used community-based mediation to resolve a dispute over land ownership. It was a really powerful example of how this approach can work in practice.
Wow, that's impressive. And in Liberia, I've heard that there was a case where a group of women used the legal system to challenge a law that was discriminatory against them. How did that play out?
Yes, that's a great example. The women's group was able to successfully challenge the law and have it changed. It was a really important victory for women's rights in Liberia.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Liberia would agree with me that this is a significant achievement. And what about the role of the judiciary in both countries? How do they approach the interpretation of laws and the protection of individual rights?
That's a great question. In both countries, the judiciary plays a crucial role in interpreting laws and protecting individual rights. However, I think there are some differences in how they approach this. In Laos, the judiciary is more focused on promoting social harmony and community-based resolution, while in Liberia, the judiciary is more focused on upholding individual rights and freedoms.
I see. And what about the impact of international human rights law in both countries? How have they incorporated international norms and standards into their domestic legal systems?
That's a great question. Both countries have made significant efforts to incorporate international human rights law into their domestic legal systems. For example, in Laos, they've ratified several key human rights treaties, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child. In Liberia, they've also ratified several key human rights treaties, including the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women.
That's impressive. And finally, what do you think are some key challenges facing both countries in terms of promoting and protecting individual rights and freedoms?
That's a great question. I think one of the key challenges facing both countries is the issue of corruption. Corruption can undermine the rule of law and erode trust in the legal system. In both countries, there have been efforts to address corruption, but it remains a significant challenge.
I agree. And what about the role of civil society in promoting and protecting individual rights and freedoms? How have organizations and activists in both countries been working to advance these goals?
That's a great question. In both countries, civil society has played a crucial role in promoting and protecting individual rights and freedoms. For example, in Laos, there are several organizations that work to promote human rights and advocate for the rights of marginalized communities. In Liberia, there are also several organizations that work to promote human rights and advocate for the rights of marginalized communities.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think civil society has a key role to play in promoting and protecting individual rights and freedoms? Or is it up to the government to take the lead?
Great question. I think civil society has a crucial role to play in promoting and protecting individual rights and freedoms. By holding governments accountable and advocating for the rights of marginalized communities, civil society can help to ensure that individual rights and freedoms are protected.
That's a great point. And finally, what do you think our listeners can take away from this conversation about the legal systems of Laos and Liberia?
That's a great question. I think our listeners can take away the importance of understanding the cultural and historical context of legal systems, as well as the role of community-based mediation in civil society in promoting and promoting and protecting individual rights and freedoms.
I agree. And what about the significance of landmark cases and the impact of international human rights law on both countries?
Yes. Those are all important factors to consider when understanding the legal systems of Laos and Liberia. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have made significant progress in promoting and protecting individual rights and freedoms, despite the challenges they face.
I'm certain that our listeners will find this conversation informative and engaging. And, finally, what about the next topic? Shall we move on to discussing the education systems of Laos and Liberia?
Yes. That's a great idea. Let's do it. I'm so to dive into the world of spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities in Laos and Liberia. Who would have thought that these two countries would have so much in common when it comes to wellness?
Come on, Mira. Don't be too quick to assume. We've got some fascinating differences to explore, and I'm sure our listeners will be by what they learn.
Exactly. And that's what makes this conversation so fun. So, let's start with Laos. I've heard that their traditional spas are just incredible. Have you ever been to one, Leo?
Actually, I have. And it was an experience I'll never forget. The hot springs, the massages, the whole atmosphere was just, well, let's just say it was a little slice of heaven.
I can imagine. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. So, tell us, what was your favorite part of the spa experience in Laos?
Oh, definitely the massage. I mean, who doesn't love a good massage, right? But seriously, the therapists were so skilled and attentive. It was like they were reading my mind.
That's amazing. And I'm sure our listeners are wondering, how can I experience this for myself? Well, Leo, I think it's time for us to move on to Liberia.
Ah, yes, the land of contrasts. From the bustling streets of Monrovia to the tranquil surroundings of the national parks, Liberia has so much to offer when it comes to relaxation.
Exactly. And I'm particularly interested in learning more about their traditional medicine practices. Have you heard about the use of herbs and plants in Liberian medicine? Leo?
Yes. It's fascinating. They use a combination of traditional and modern practices to treat a range of ailments, from fever to skin conditions.
Wow, that's incredible. And I'm sure our listeners are curious about how they can access these services. Do you think it's something that could be replicated in other parts of the world? Leo?
Well, that's a great question. While it's not possible to exactly replicate the traditional medicine practices of Liberia, I do think that there are some valuable lessons to be learned from their approach.
I completely agree. And speaking of valuable lessons, I think it's time for us to wrap up this segment on spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities in Laos and Liberia.
Already? I'm not sure I'm ready to say goodbye to this topic just yet.
Well, I'm sure our listeners will be eager to hear more. But for now, let's just say that both Laos and Liberia offer unique and inspiring examples of how to live a balanced and healthy lifestyle.
Absolutely. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll be able to visit both countries and experience their wellness offerings firsthand.
That would be amazing. And who knows? Maybe our listeners will be inspired to plan their own wellness retreats in these incredible countries.
And who knows? Maybe we'll even get to experience a traditional Liberian massage together. Mira!
Oh, I'm not sure I'm ready for that just yet, Leo. But, in all seriousness, we hope that our listeners have enjoyed this segment on spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities in Laos and Liberia.
And we hope that you'll join us next time on our podcast as we explore more fascinating topics and destinations around the world.
Until next time, stay well and stay happy. And don't forget to follow us on social media for more updates and behind-the-scenes peeks into our adventures. Let's talk about Laos and Liberia, two countries with unique approaches to spirituality and faith. In Laos, the majority of the population practices Theravada Buddhism, which emphasizes individual spiritual development and self-reflection.
That's fascinating. In contrast, Liberia has a strong Christian presence, with about 85% of the population identifying as Christian. But what's interesting is that both countries have a rich cultural heritage and a strong sense of community, which plays a significant role in their spiritual practices.
Exactly. In Laos, you'll find many beautiful temples and monasteries, where monks and nuns live and study the teachings of the Buddha. These temples are not only places of worship, but also centers of learning and community.
And in Liberia, you'll find many vibrant churches and cathedrals, where people come together to worship and celebrate their faith. But what's unique about Liberia is the presence of traditional African spirituality, which is still practiced by many people in the country.
I'm curious. Leo, how do you think the cultural heritage of both countries influences their spiritual practices? Do you think it's more about tradition or personal choice?
Great question. Mira, I think it's a combination of both. In Laos, for example, the Theravada Buddhist tradition is deeply ingrained in the culture. But at the same time, many people are also drawn to more modern and individualized forms of spirituality.
That makes sense. And in Liberia, how do you think the Christian presence has shaped the country's spiritual landscape? Has it led to a more homogeneous or diverse spiritual environment?
Well, on the one hand, the Christian presence has certainly had an impact on the country's spiritual landscape. But, on the other hand, I think it's also led to a more diverse spiritual environment, where people are free to choose their own path and practice their own faith.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Laos and Liberia would agree with me that spirituality is an essential part of their daily lives. But what's interesting is that both countries also have a strong sense of community and social responsibility, which is closely tied to their spiritual practices.
Absolutely. In Laos, for example, the concept of bhikkhu or monk is not just about spiritual development but also about community service and social responsibility. And in Liberia, the Christian tradition emphasizes the importance of caring for others and serving the community.
That's so true. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a rich tradition of spiritual leaders and teachers who have played a significant role in shaping their spiritual practices.
Yes, and these leaders have often been instrumental in promoting social justice and human rights, which is a key aspect of both Buddhist and Christian traditions.
If you're listening to this podcast and you're from Laos or Liberia, we'd love to hear from you about your own spiritual experiences and practices. What do you think are the most important aspects of spirituality in your country?
And if you're from elsewhere, but have visited or lived in Laos or Liberia, we'd also love to hear about your experiences and observations. How do you think the spiritual practices in these countries compare to your own experiences?
Finally, let's talk about the role of spirituality in promoting social justice and human rights in both countries. How do you think spirituality can be used to bring about positive change and promote equality and justice?
Well, I think that spirituality can be a powerful tool for promoting social justice and human rights. By emphasizing the importance of compassion, empathy, and kindness, spiritual leaders and teachers can help to create a more just and equitable society.
That's a great point. Leo. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong tradition of social activism and community organizing, which is closely tied to their spiritual practices.
Absolutely. In Laos, for example, the Buddhist tradition emphasizes the importance of mindfulness and compassion, which can be applied to social and environmental issues.
And in Liberia, the Christian tradition emphasizes the importance of caring for others and serving the community, which can be applied to issues of social justice and human rights. It's been fascinating to explore the opportunities for religious and spiritual needs in Laos and Liberia. Both countries have a rich cultural heritage and a strong sense of community, which plays a significant role in their spiritual practices.
And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong tradition of spiritual leaders and teachers who have played a significant role in shaping their spiritual practices.
Well, that's all for now. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the opportunities for religious and spiritual needs in Laos and Liberia. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to share them with us in the comments section.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more exciting episodes on cultural and spiritual topics.
I'm sure our listeners are curious about Laos and Liberia's approaches to social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity. In Laos, the government has implemented policies to promote equality, but what's interesting is how it's been received by the people.
I completely agree. Mira, in Laos, the emphasis is on community and family, which often leads to a more harmonious society. However, I'm not sure if it's enough to address the underlying issues of inequality.
That's a great point, Leo. And speaking of underlying issues, in Liberia, the country has been working to rebuild after the Civil War, which has led to a more inclusive society. But what's fascinating is how they're incorporating traditional practices into their modern policies.
Ah, yes. Liberia's emphasis on traditional practices is a great example of how they're trying to balance their cultural heritage with modernization. And I'm curious. Mira, have you noticed any interesting cultural differences between the two countries?
Actually, Leo, I think one of the most striking differences is the way they celebrate their festivals. In Laos, the Bang Fire Festival is a huge celebration of the full moon, while in Liberia, they have the KRU Town Festival, which is a celebration of their rich cultural heritage.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these festivals. Maybe we can even get some feedback from them in the comments section. I'm curious. Mira, what do you think is the key to promoting social equality and respect for minorities in both countries?
That's a great question. Leo, I think one of the most important things is to encourage open communication and dialogue between different communities. In Laos, for example, they have community-led projects that bring together people from different backgrounds to work on social issues.
That's a fantastic approach, Mira. And I think it's also essential to recognize and respect the diversity of different cultures and traditions. In Liberia, for instance, they have a strong emphasis on traditional practices, but they're also open to modernization and progress.
Exactly. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have made significant progress in recent years, but there's still much work to be done. In Laos, for example, women's rights are still a major issue, while in Liberia, there are still challenges related to land ownership and access to education.
Ah, yes. Those are definitely important issues to address. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that promoting social equality and respect for minorities is crucial for building a harmonious society. Maybe we can even get some feedback from them on how to improve these issues in both countries.
That's a great idea. Leo, and speaking of feedback, I'm curious, have you noticed any interesting examples of social equality and respect for minorities in your travels to both countries?
Actually, Mira, I have noticed some amazing examples of community-led initiatives in Laos that bring together people from different backgrounds to work on social issues. And in Liberia, I've seen some incredible examples of traditional practices being incorporated into modern policies.
Wow, that's fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about these examples. Maybe we can even have some guest speakers join us in future episodes to share their experiences.
That's a great idea, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a rich cultural heritage that's worth celebrating. In Laos, for example, they have a beautiful tradition of handicrafts, while in Liberia, they have a vibrant music scene.
Yes. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on community and family, which is reflected in their social policies. In Laos, for example, they have a strong emphasis on family planning and education, while in Liberia, they have a strong emphasis on traditional medicine and healing.
That's an interesting contrast. Mira, I think it's also worth noting that both countries have made significant progress in recent years. But there's still much work to be done. In Laos, for example, they're working to improve access to education and healthcare, while in Liberia, they're working to rebuild their infrastructure and promote economic development.
Yes. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on traditional practices, but they're also open to modernization and progress. In Laos, for example, they're incorporating traditional practices into their modern policies, while in Liberia, they're using technology to promote social change.
Ah, yes. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a rich cultural heritage that's worth celebrating. In Laos, for example, they have a beautiful tradition of handicrafts, while in Liberia, they have a vibrant music scene.
Ah, yes. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on community and family, which is reflected in their social policies. In Laos, for example, they have a strong emphasis on family planning and education, while in Liberia, they have a strong emphasis on traditional medicine and healing.
That's an interesting contrast. Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have made significant progress in recent years. But there's still much work to be done. In Laos, for example, they're working to improve access to education and healthcare, while in Liberia, they're working to rebuild their infrastructure and promote economic development.
Ah, yes. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on traditional practices, but they're also open to modernization and progress. In Laos, for example, they're incorporating traditional practices into their modern policies, while in Liberia, they're using technology to promote social change.
Ah, yes. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a rich cultural heritage that's worth celebrating. In Laos, for example, they have a beautiful tradition of handicrafts, while in Liberia, they have a vibrant music scene.
Ah, yes. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on community and family, which is reflected in their social policies. In Laos, for example, they have a strong emphasis on family planning and education, while in Liberia, they have a strong emphasis on traditional medicine and healing.
That's an interesting contrast. Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have made significant progress in recent years. But there's still much work to be done. In Laos, for example, they're working to improve access to education and healthcare. While in Liberia, they're working to rebuild their infrastructure and promote economic development.
Ah, yes. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on traditional practices, but they're also open to modernization and progress. In Laos, for example, they're incorporating traditional practices into their modern policies, while in Liberia, they're using technology to promote social change. I'm curious, have you ever tried to fill out tax forms in a foreign country? It's like trying to decipher a secret code, right? I once had to do it in Laos and I thought I was going to pull my hair out.
Oh, I can relate. I once had to do my taxes in a small town in Liberia and I swear, the forms were written in a language I didn't understand. But, seriously, Mira, let's talk about taxation in Laos and Liberia. What do we know about their tax systems?
Well, from what I've researched, Laos has a relatively simple tax system, with a focus on income tax, value-added tax, and property tax. But I'm sure there are some nuances we're not aware of. Leo, what's your take on the tax system in Liberia?
Yes. Liberia has a more complex tax system, with multiple taxes and fees imposed on individuals and businesses. It's a bit of a jungle, but I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. Mira, have you ever heard of the Liberty tax in Liberia?
No, I don't think I have. What's that all about? Sounds like a tax on freedom or something.
Well, it's not exactly that, but it's a tax on companies that operate in Liberia. It's meant to encourage foreign investment, but it can be a bit of a burden for some businesses.
I see. And what about retirement plans in Laos? Do they have any social safety nets in place for long-term immigrants?
Yes. Laos has a pension system in place, but it's not very well developed. However, the government is working on improving it to attract more foreign retirees.
That's interesting. And what about Liberia? Do they have any social safety nets in place for long-term immigrants?
Well, Liberia has a relatively basic social safety net, but it's not very effective. However, the government is working on improving it, especially for foreign workers.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do they have any experience with tax systems in Laos or Liberia? Have they had to navigate the complex tax systems in either country?
Well, I'm sure our listeners would love to share their experiences. But in the meantime, let's talk about the benefits of living in Laos and Liberia. What are some of the advantages of living in these countries, tax-wise?
Well, for one, both countries have relatively low tax rates compared to other countries in the region. And in Laos, there's a tax-free zone for foreign businesses, which can be a big incentive for investors.
That's true. And in Liberia, there's a tax holiday for new businesses, which can be a big boost for entrepreneurs.
I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me. The tax-free zone in Laos is a huge advantage for foreign businesses.
I'm sure they would. But what about social rights for long-term immigrants in Laos and Liberia? What kind of benefits can they expect?
Well, in Laos, long-term immigrants can expect to receive health insurance and access to public education. And in Liberia, they can expect to receive health insurance, access to public education, and even some form of pension.
That's great to hear. And what about our listeners who are moving to Laos or Liberia? What advice would you give them?
Well, I would say that it's essential to research the tax systems and social safety nets in place before making the move. And also, it's crucial to understand the culture and customs of the country you're moving to.
That's great advice, Mira. And I would add that it's also essential to be flexible and adaptable when moving to a new country.
Absolutely. And if you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
And finally, let's talk about the benefits of living in Laos and Liberia. What are some of the advantages of living in these countries, aside from the tax benefits?
Well, for one, both countries have a rich culture and history, with many festivals and celebrations throughout the year.
That's true. And in Laos, there's also a beautiful natural landscape, with many opportunities for hiking and outdoor activities.
And in Liberia, there's a vibrant music scene, with many talented musicians and artists.
That's great to hear. And finally, let's wrap up this topic. What do we think our listeners should take away from our discussion on taxation, retirement, and social rights for long-term immigrants in Laos and Liberia?
Well, I think our listeners should take away the importance of understanding the tax systems and social safety nets in place before making the move. And also, the importance of being flexible and adaptable when moving to a new country.
And I think our listeners should also take away the many benefits of living in Laos and Liberia, aside from the tax benefits. From the rich culture and history to the beautiful natural landscapes and vibrant music scenes, there's so much to explore and discover in these countries.
And that's a wrap for today's topic. Thanks for tuning in. Everyone, if you have any questions or comments, please let us know in the comments section.
And don't forget to like and subscribe for more content on taxation, retirement, and social rights for long-term immigrants in Laos and Liberia.
Hey everyone, welcome back to our podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a rate of meeting specific interests in Laos and Liberia. Both countries have unique offerings for enthusiasts, and I'm to share some of them with you. So, let's dive right in. Have you guys ever been to Laos or Liberia? Or do you have any friends who live there? I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about these countries.
Yeah, I've been to Laos. And it's a beautiful country with a rich culture. The people are super friendly, and the food is amazing. I mean, have you tried the laap? It's like a Laotian version of a salad, but with meat and spices. Just about it is making me hungry.
Okay. Let's talk about the rate of meeting specific interests. In Laos, I've heard that the community is very welcoming to expats and tourists. They have a lot of events and festivals throughout the year, which is great for meeting new people. Have you Leo, ever been to any of these festivals?
Yeah, I went to the Bang 5 Festival, which is a rocket festival. It was so much fun. They launched these huge rockets into the sky, and it's like a big celebration. The atmosphere is electric, and everyone is so happy. And I met some really cool people there, and we even had a few impromptu jam sessions with some local musicians.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. And speaking of music, Laos has a rich musical heritage. They have a lot of traditional instruments, like the khan, which is a free reed mouth organ. Have you ever heard of it, Leo?
Yeah, I have. The khan is an amazing instrument. I even got to try playing it once, and it was really challenging, but also super fun. The sound is so unique and hauntingly beautiful. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it.
Absolutely. And Liberia, on the other hand, has a vibrant music scene as well. They have a lot of traditional music, like the bass, which is a type of drum. I heard that the bass is a really important instrument in Liberian music. Do you, Leo, know anything about the bass?
Yeah, I do. The bass is a really important instrument in Liberian music, and it's used in a lot of traditional songs and dances. I've even heard that the bass is used in some modern Liberian music as well. It's really cool to see how traditional music can influence modern music.
That's so cool. And speaking of traditional music, both Laos and Liberia have a rich cultural heritage. They have a lot of traditional festivals and celebrations, which are great for meeting new people and learning about the local culture. Have you, Leo, ever been to any of these festivals in Liberia?
Yeah, I went to the KPADW Festival, which is a traditional festival in Liberia. It was so much fun. The music, the dancing, the food, everything was just amazing. I even got to try some of the local cuisine, which was delicious. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. And finally, let's talk about community engagement. Both Laos and Liberia have a strong sense of community, and there are many ways to get involved and meet new people. Have you, Leo, ever been involved in any community projects in Laos or Liberia?
Yeah, I was involved in a community project in Laos that helped to build a new school for local kids. It was a really rewarding experience, and I got to meet some amazing people who were passionate about making a difference in their community.
That's so cool. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. And finally, I'd like to ask our listeners a question. If you're living in Laos or Liberia, or if you have any friends who live there, please let us know in the comments below about your experiences with meeting specific interests. We'd love to hear about it.
And don't forget to follow us on AI YouTube for more episodes like this. Hit that bell icon to catch our videos the moment they drop and be among the first to listen.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll be back soon with more. So until then, take care and see you in the next one. Warmest wishes from us.